Turn on.
Toss the weakest man, Steve Harvey.
Tune in.
The Satanist, the black magician, is not seeking that kind of...
I think we're both control where they keep the calculations more or less
Steve Outtrim, welcome back to the Gnostic Media Podcast.
Thanks, Jan. It's good to be back.
It's great to have you, and people have been waiting for part 5 of our Shadow History of Burners series for some time. It's really good to have you back. It's good to, get this out. I know you have a lot of great information for people today. So, anyway, how have you been doing since you were on last?
Yeah, I've been doing very well, thanks, Jan. This is an exciting episode for me today because I'm going to start really presenting a lot of the research that I've been doing and you've been assisting with. And I'd also like to thank everybody else in the audience that's been collaborating with us, commenting on the YouTube videos, on the Facebook pages, on my site, burners.me, on Jan's site, gnosticmedia.com. It's really quite helpful. We're a community of researchers all working together and trying to find the truth. And our approach to the truth is trying to get primary source documents, quotations, words straight from the horse's mouth. And, we're going to get into some of that today. I'd also like to remind everybody that all my work here is based on open source intelligence. And that's particularly significant with this part because we're going to really get into the guts of some of the things the Defense Department and the Pentagon have been doing related to Burning Man. And so I'm not revealing any classified information. Anything that I'm talking about has been found on the web. And when it comes to some of the specific people, as we start to get into the who of this, I'm sharing information that they themselves have posted on the internet on their own websites and personal profile pages. But part 5, let me move to the share screen. So part 5 is called Burning with the Man. And, a big symbolic underpinning of the concept of Burning Man is that we're going on a pilgrimage to this remote location where we're forced to be radically self-reliant. And at the end of it, we burn this big statue. We're around the statue of the man the whole time. And at the end of it, they burn it. And then in recent years, they burn the man on a Saturday. On a Sunday night, there's a temple. They burn the temple on the Sunday as well. This year, for 2017, they've just announced next year's theme, which is radical ritual. And they're going to put the man inside the temple just to really mix things up for the burners. So speaking of burners, you can see on the heading slide here, here's someone actually being branded with the Burning Man symbol. And the person holding on to them, you can see to the right of the photo there, the mark on their arm where they were previously branded. So
they're literally burning the man here.
Yeah, they're burning the man into themselves. And
they're actually burning themselves. They're burning the man also. There's multiple layers there.
Yeah, and getting burned by the man and wearing the mark of the man. Is that the mark of the beast? And they're being branded like cattle, which really fits into the Aldous Huxley worldview of the painless concentration camps for entire societies. So here's a few quotes about Burning Man that I like. This is from the Burning Man press kit in 1995. They call it an arts festival, a ritual sacrifice, a spiritual quest, and a postmodern carnival of the absurd. I think that still sums up a lot of Burning Man today, and that's one thing that makes it unique from other festivals. But the idea of the carnival of the absurd is really quite interesting. That in 1995, in their press kit, they say, "Hey, we're a carnival of the absurd." And 1996, as we showed in previous episodes, their entire theme is Hellco and Satanism and the devil marching everywhere. So they have this convenient smokescreen of saying, "Oh, we're a carnival of the absurd," which allows them to openly practice whatever form of occultism, paganism, Satanism, or various, non-Judeo-Christian religion they want to do, including atheism. Another quote is, "It's America's Got Talent for the Illuminati." And we'll perhaps come back to that in a future episode where we do a little bit more speculation. But Burning Man is very much a recruiting tool, certainly for the tech industry and for other networks that are operating within that. Larry Harvey is the founder of Burning Man. In 2014, he said, "Our vision of social engineering is about creating a context around things that are already organized." So they have a vision of social engineering. I mean, that honestly should be enough for any burner to be very, very concerned. And anybody that follows your show, Jan, will understand that the vision of social engineering is one that's very much shared by the oligarchs. It's a unified vision, and it's being applied against us, the people, with really some quite devastating consequences. Elon Musk, he's a big-time burner, billionaire burner. He said, "Burning Man is Silicon Valley. If you haven't been, you just don't get it. You can take the craziest LA party and multiply it by 1,000. It doesn't even get fucking close to what's in Silicon Valley." And I see what he's saying. I mean, I haven't been to the craziest LA party. I'm sure he has, but I've been to some pretty wild parties in LA and around the world. And there is stuff at Burning Man that you don't see anywhere else. And it's pretty wild. And part of what he's getting at with this comment is really the innovation of the Bay Area and the cross-disciplinary collaboration where you have someone does welding, someone does 3D printing, someone does LED lights, someone programs the lights and makes an iPhone app for it, someone does the flame effects and pyrotechnics, and there's a whole skills transfer element to the collaboration around art and Burning Man and merging the art with technology as well as the logistical requirements, and that's not replicated at many other parties around the world. It's been called the secular pilgrimage destination of the New World by secretsinplainsight.com. And we're going to come back to that one in this episode. Reverend Dr. Malcolm Clemens Young says it's one of the largest religious rituals in the world. So here you have being a secular pilgrimage destination, you also have it being a religious ritual. You have the founders saying it's not paganism, but having satanic elements to it. They say it's not a festival, then they say it's an arts festival. I mean, it's just full of contradictions, Burning Man, and so much so that you think that's probably by design. James Whistler said Satan's birthday party. I think we used that in a previous episode. It's the new capitalism. Bruce Sterling said it was the new American holiday. It was a front cover story for Wired in 1996. The new American holiday, go to Burning Man. He took his 9-year-old daughter with him, and her description of it is, "This is awful. It's like a living nightmare." So I mean, it's not surprising. There's people dressed up as Satan running around and machines breathing fire. It would seem really quite nightmarish and scary to a 9-year-old kid, I would think. And then the final one of these quotes, the definitive book on Burning Man is This is Burning Man by Brian Doherty. He's the editor of Reason.com. And that's a really great history of Burning Man. I'd call that the official history. And from that book, he says that John Law, who's one of the co-founders, John Law is willing to call Larry evil and imputes the most uncharitable possible motives to his actions, backed up with the observation that he knows the man and worked with him for so long that he saw Larry's true self. He claims that Larry's charm and apparent good intentions are merely camouflage. So this is one of the core three founders of Burning Man saying that this guy is evil and he knows the guy. And you've got to put that's not evidence, but we've got to put all of these pieces of information that we're collecting together, and then at the end of it say, well, what sort of picture's being painted here? And I'd certainly maybe would ring the coincidence meter that, one of his closest co-workers says that he's evil, and the thing is, has dedicated to Helco and Satanism. Ding, ding. All right. Here's some of the claims of Burning Man. And actually, before I read through the claims, let me read from the right of the screen here, which is in 2004, they came up with the 10 principles of Burning Man, which are radical inclusion, gifting, decommodification, radical self-reliance, radical self-expression, communal effort, civic responsibility, leave no trace, participation, and immediacy. Now, so some of the things that strike me about that is 3 of the 10 principles contain the word radical. And next year's 2017 theme, Radical Ritual. They obviously very attached to this word radical. And it has a particularly powerful meaning in the Bay Area, because we have the lefty hero Saul Alinsky, who wrote the book Rules for Radicals. This is like the Bible, the operating manual, the tactics of the new left. And we've seen in the recent election, these Alinsky tactics being used straight out of the book. Hillary Clinton wrote her thesis on this guy, Saul Alinsky. The book Rules for Radicals is, you want to say it, yeah?
Well, what I was going to say is even the Getty Museum last year in Los Angeles had a new thing about how they were going to be promoting the word radical. So, this is all right in line. It's clear that it's all coordinated, because how do they all adopt it all at the same time,
Yeah. Well, anyway, the book Rules for Radicals, in the opening page of the book, Saul Alinsky dedicates it to the original radical, Lucifer. So, 666 repeated 3 times, Lucifer, Lucifer, Lucifer. Lucifer's the original radical, and this is a thing for radicals. Moving on, we'll talk some more about these principles as we go. But people can, if they really want to find out the official story of Burning Man, go to burningman.org. It's all there. You can read their version of these events. And here's some of the claims that are made by the Burning Man people. We're making the world a better place. We leave no trace. It's not about money. Everything is free. And this is the model for a new way of living. Anyone is welcome and can wear anything that they want. No artist has ever signed their art at Burning Man. It's more than just a rave. It's a social movement. It's a transformational experience. It's a spiritual experience. It's the religion of no religion. It's a recreation of the ancient mystery rites. It's a self-service cult. You wash your own brain. Burning Man is a machine to change personalities. It has hardware and software, and you can tweak it, and we've done that. We're social engineers. That's what we do. We started in a garage the same time as Google did. And then they've also said that the computer industry shift from Silicon Valley up to San Francisco was because of Burning Man. And then that Tesla Motors built their gigafactory in Reno because of Burning Man. These are all some pretty bold claims for a dance party. Excuse me. I just want to get to my notes here. So, yeah, we have a few contradictions coming in straight away. So I've got a count of 4. So they say that it's not about money. Everything is free. They also say that the only thing you can buy is ice and coffee. But there's actually more than 100 licensed venues. They sell scarves, calendars, T-shirts. When you're out there at Burning Man, you can buy gasoline, propane, and energy drinks. It's the idea of it being a world without money is a little different from the reality of it. They also say that no artist has ever signed their art. So we've got multiple reports from artists that they have signed their art at Burning Man, including photos. So I don't know. Why are they trying to push this message that no artist ever signed their art at Burning Man when it's an arts festival, ostensibly to assist artists? One interesting observation of the art at Burning Man is it's very collaborative. It's, in the traditional world of fine art, it's one guy with a paintbrush, that's your artist. But Burning Man, art could be a team of people. And by sort of encouraging that, it's a little bit like when the CIA launched modern art and that. It was really an attack of cultural debasement on the world of fine art. And by lowering prices for the traditional old paintings that were actually the ones of value, they'd be able to buy those up with their dirty money that needed to be washed on the cheap. And meanwhile, they promote this whole new kind of art and, see if they can attract the glittering young things of society because art is hip and edgy. And so that's a big element at Burning Man. Going into the other contradictions, they say that they started around the same time as Google in a garage. Well, officially Burning Man started in 1986 and officially Google started in 1998. So that isn't the same time. I think we've gone through that one before. But and then the shift of the Silicon Valley up to San Francisco being because of them. If that was the case, Burning Man recently moved slightly out of the central San Francisco district, and they're now in the Mission, which is the hipster epicentral of the Bay Area. And, all of the tech companies would have followed them to the mission if it was true that they were this kind of leading light. And instead, they're going across the bridge to Oakland. But I think that there is some element of truth to this idea that you had a bunch of these hippies and freaks down on the beach at Baker Beach around about 1990, dancing around a man, probably taking LSD, probably interested in the occult. And then the shiny Pied Piper kind of symbol led them out to the desert, and it was an experiment, like an acid test, if you like, to see who would follow. I think the shift of the tech company into the city was because they wanted to hire younger people. Silicon Valley is more family oriented, more expensive. Young people can't afford to live there. And then Mayor Ed Lee gave a whole bunch of payroll tax breaks to companies like Salesforce and Twitter that came to the city and started building massive skyscrapers and hiring, tens of thousands of people. So, in my opinion, as someone inside the tech industry, that sort of thing is what led to the recent shift to San Francisco, nothing to do with Burning Man. And then as for Tesla building their Gigafactory, because of it, I mean, who's to know? Again, Elon Musk got massive tax breaks. And if you want to look into the history of that Gigafactory, I've got some links to the notes of this slide. There's a funny story with Dennis Hoff, the owner of the Bunny Ranch, who was one of the main investors in that. That's a legal brothel in Nevada. So, looking at the what Burning Man, they say it's not about money, but their annual budget is getting close to $40 million a year for an event that goes for a week. You get a ticket, and then you have to pay a mailing fee, and you have to pay a handling fee, and then you have to pay tax, and it's getting pretty close now to $500 for a regular ticket. They have if you're rich, you can buy a more expensive ticket, and so there's a restriction on the number of regular tickets. Seems to be no restriction on the number of high-priced tickets, and the people are paying up to $1,500 to get a ticket to this thing. That's not about money. But then when you're there, you have to everyone has to provide for themselves. So there are tens of thousands of RVs. There are generators. There's refrigerators, freezers. There's chefs. There's all kinds of it costs you a lot of money for every day that you're at Burning Man. And you generate a lot of waste. People go to Walmart or Costco and they stock up on massive amounts of bottled water, and at the end of it, they've got hundreds, if not thousands, of plastic bottles. This year, they were able to recycle 170,000 aluminum cans, which is two hoppers full of cans, and they got about $1,500 from recycling. But for a city of 80,000 people for a week, I believe a lot more waste was generated than 170,000 cans. And the idea is that you take out everything you brought in, you take out with you, you leave no trace. And they have this concept that's called MOOP, which stands for matter out of place. And I've got on the screen there the MOOP map. So basically when Burning Man ends, they go through every single day working through the grid and looking for the slightest objects, like a bit of a feather has fallen, or a sequin, or a cigarette butt, all of this stuff. They're painstakingly picking it up, but they're also marking on the map where it was found. And this is a way of publicly shaming the non-conformists. There are certain camps in this map that, due to the geography of the place and the wind conditions, waste is more likely to be blown towards these camps and accumulate there. And Burning Man's in charge of placing all these different camps where they want in the city. So the camps that get these less favorable placement can then be, the victim of psychological operations to publicly shame them to the rest of the Burning Man community. So whereas if you're one of the favored ones, they know, and they'll put you somewhere that's always going to get the green score on this MOOP map. But it's sort of created this environmental Nazi kind of idea. And I think with Burning Man's principles as well, there's this whole subculture now of enforcing the principles. And what used to be an anarchic festival of rebellion against the man suddenly starts to look really like the new social architecture of the man implementing his rules and doing it with a force of volunteers. I've listed some of the things you could buy there. I'll just go through it again because I've got a whole list. Iced coffee, energy drinks, propane, gasoline, generator fuel, RV dumps, bulk water, hotel rooms, art cars, concierges, Sherpas, equipment hire, vehicle passes. People are paying for all of this stuff. People are paying $10,000 for hotel rooms at Burning Man, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So for a couple, that's $20,000 to get a room. Some of these camps, if you look at the Pentagon where the MOOP map is, the inner circle is called the Esplanade. That's where the biggest and largest camps are placed. And the budget for a camp on the Esplanade is probably at least $500,000, maybe as much as $2 million. And there were 1,150 camps placed at Burning Man officially this year. And then there's also like thousands, tens of thousands of people who just show up and camp wherever they want, as well as these organized ones. But if you think of that, the budget, even for a small camp, is probably $5,000, $10,000 with everybody chipping in. And there's more than 1,000 of these things. So a lot of money is being generated for around the local economy in Reno, as well as what's actually being spent at Burning Man and what's being spent by people to go to Burning Man. And because of this, it really is a rich people's event. And people get quite upset with me at burners.me when I point that out, because they say, well, Burning Man's not for the 1%. It's welcome to everybody. But if you earn more than $50,000 a year, US, you're in the top 0.3% of wealth in the world, right? It doesn't sound like much in this country, but that's the reality for the world. And more than half of burners make that. About 3% of burners make more than $300,000 a year. So it's very, very wealthy. But you don't necessarily have to have money to go there. And if you have talent, artistic talent, you can make an artwork, you're theatrical and entertaining, then you may well get a rich sponsor or patron. And this is this word that's come into the burner lexicon recently of Sherpas, that people are paying someone to go pick up their camp for them, take it away, pick up all the trash, carry their bags, and when they arrive there, the camp is just ready to go. And from the wealthy person's point of view, that's radically self-reliant. Because I can do that, why wouldn't I do that? From the burner's point of view, it's like, well, a ticket now is going to someone who's being paid to work at Burning Man. They're not there for the party. They're not there to participate and collaborate and be a part of it. So, their values are starting to become contradictory, and it's causing some tension within the community. Throughout the Burning Man goes for 8 days, and throughout the week, there are thousands of participatory micro events. And it's all kinds of sex-themed events. You can look the stuff up online. I probably don't need to go through it, but there's really other festivals have workshops and stuff going on, but there's nothing quite like Burning Man that has. For example, I'll share one story of one I saw on I think my second or third Burning Man. It was an Arctic boob chiller. And someone had made a cardboard box with Arctic boob chiller painted on it, and then there was a stage. And the girls had to go up and place their boobs inside this box, which was refrigerated. And then they had to run on the stage with their nipples sticking out and yell about how great it felt to have cool boobs. And this is somebody's art installation at Burning Man, right? There were probably hundreds, if not thousands, of girls that loved the idea of it. So it's hard to say that it's radical self-reliance when now people are bringing concierges and chefs and drivers, and there's a type of lady that was advertised at one camp recently, put on by a Burning Man director, called a mistress of merriment. And that's harking back to the merry pranksters again. But the mistresses of merriment were beautiful young 20-something models there to entertain these, old dudes in their 50s who were flying in by private jet. Who knows what form of entertainment was going on. But I do point out that this is in Nevada, where a lot of things are legal that aren't legal in other states. Their other value, Burning Man's very big on the idea of radical inclusion, that everyone's welcome, but it's almost exclusively white. It's probably 80% plus white, and they're trying to fix that, but their excuse is that black people don't like to go camping. I don't think that's kind of a lame excuse myself, but who cares what the racial mixes of various events? People go to the thing where they find their own crowd. But at Burning Man, we've exposed some of the cult-like behavior in previous episodes and psychological warfare tactics, propaganda, shaming. I mean, they go to extreme extents to push people out of the herd that don't conform and to encourage everyone within the herd to, look inside the cult for answers, don't look outside the cult. Likewise, they have a value of civic responsibility. Well, this thing is run on extreme secrecy, like more secrecy than I've seen from most Silicon Valley tech companies. They also actively use propaganda, including employing a minister of propaganda for most of their years. And propaganda is fake news, people. It's lying. If you employ a minister of propaganda, it's because you want to lie to your subjects. And the Burning Man has got an extremely deep cooperation with authorities. It's the largest event on federal land, and we're going to delve into that a bit more tonight. We welcome the stranger, they say, but it's really they only welcome the strangers if they're open to indoctrination. And for example, they say that you can wear anything you like, but if you go to Burning Man in regular world clothes, like let's say you have a Golden State Warriors T-shirt on and a pair of jeans, you will be mocked and ridiculed by the burners. People will come and yell at you and lecture you and how dare you be. They get very, very, very offended. And in fact, there is now a burner look that you can look at someone and say that's a burner just from what they're wearing. And this is, as we've shown before, with the changing images of man. These things are very carefully calculated. The language, the tribal elements of identification. And they welcome nudity, LGBT, and the Q now, whatever the Q is. Polyamory is very, very big in the burner scene, and also bondage and domination and fetish. That's very welcome. So it's radically inclusive. Everyone's welcome as long as you are 100% tolerant of the most extreme of the fetish lifestyle that you will ever see in your life.
So as long as you're tolerant of all of that, but they're not going to be tolerant of anybody who's somewhat intolerant. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. That's right. And if you show up and you're uncomfortable with that, they will try to mind control you into thinking that it's normal and accepted. And by they, who is they? Look, that's a big question, and that's probably beyond the scope of determining. I'm not talking about just the employees of the Burning Man organization, but that's what's going on with this thing. If it is a weaponized anthropology, it is to normalize all of the extreme fringe things that you find on the internet. Kids under 12 get in free, and they also don't count towards the population cap of Burning Man, so they can have as many under 12 kids as they like. And I really do struggle with this. We've talked about this on the earlier Unspun where we looked at the Burning Man census, but how can you have this nudity and polyamory and all of this stuff and the kids under 12 together at the same event? Who would even want to do that? Well, it turns out who wants to do that is Aleister Crowley. That's his vision. And Kinsey as well. They want to expose children to this stuff as early as they possibly can. And we see that being reflected in the social engineering of our broader society.
Wilhelm Reich as well.
Yeah, all these guys. And the idea of leave no trace, which I think comes from the Boy Scouts. The effects of Burning Man are visible from space. When you fly over it, you can see some of the effects with the naked eye. There's an enormous amount of pollution gets generated by 30,000 plus diesel generators going to one place. If they had this, for example, Coachella is at the polo fields in India near Palm Springs, and they don't need anywhere near the kind of waste to put that event on as Burning Man just naturally requires by definition of where it is. And that's a much larger event. And then you add up all the vehicle miles that are being traveled by these burners to get, because it is so remote. And, if you fly in from Australia to Burning Man, that's possibly 4 flights that you're going to have to get, It's a lot of hopping around. Also, the 10 principles of Burning Man, they're very me-oriented. It's all about self-expression, self-reliance. And there's very, very little in there about others. So you shouldn't actually really care about anyone else. You shouldn't really care about yourself either, because everything is one and we're all one. And so the main thing is to all come together and all be one and let those other things go. And so when they say communal effort as one of their principles, it makes me think, well, it's like a commune. And it kind of very much is like a commune, where there's the ones that I've read about anyway, they have this charismatic leader and then people that fawn all over and suck up to the leader. And then everybody else in the tribe does all the work, and the leader never does any of the work. And you can see that model of Burning Man for sure. And there's nothing in the principles about ethics, about honesty, about integrity. When they in 2011 announced that they were going to give Burning Man away and it would become a non-profit, tax-free forever, as a gesture of philanthropy, and they created an entire unique constitution for this company based on the 10 principles of Burning Man. And they paid 11, 12 million, maybe more, in lawyers and accountants over the last few years to get this thing set up. And you read all this, and there's nothing at all about it. There's only mentioned it a couple of times in passing. Ethics, honesty, integrity. I mean, if this is really about making the world a better place, why wouldn't any good, positive values be prime amongst these 10 principles? And instead of the values of the self, as we've talked about earlier, that's really what Satanism is all about. Self is God. I've got a tweet here from a guy called Danger Ranger, who's one of the founders of Burning Man, saying Burning Man has become a financial transparency leader in the world of nonprofits. And they found some professor that wrote an article, an opinion piece, and they managed to get that published on philanthropy.com. And because of that, they then hold this piece of information up as if it's proof that they're a leader in transparency. And I've actually shown it at burners.me in some detail that they took transparency away from the community. They reduced transparency. But when they reduced transparency, they create this propaganda to say they increased transparency. And all of the willing mind control drones say, oh, they increased transparency. And then anyone say, well, no, but wait a minute, here's the facts and evidence going against the mind control. They're the people who must be shunned and ostracized from the community. But this is a technique that, as you've talked about it at length, and Carol Quigley in the Anglo-American establishment talks about how they collude between universities and newspapers and politicians to have the same story appears in enough places and they all reference each other, then it becomes true.
Yeah, if people want to learn more on that, they can also see my article, Spies in Academic Clothing.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, and then there's also nothing in Burning Man's principles about consent, gratitude, and learning. And some of the other regional burns around the world have had to add these things in. And consent is an extremely big one. Just to finish off on this slide, you see a line of people with bicycles at the bottom of the slide. They're waiting to buy ice at Burning Man. So when they say there's nothing you can buy at Burning Man, look at this. This is people, all of them with cash in their pockets, standing in a line in the sun in the desert for up to 2 hours just to buy stuff. So there's a contradiction. All right. So here we have the man and Burning Man, and we at Burning Man we have coming together. We've got the official founders, some of whom are connected to the man, and then unofficial, less public founders, board members, people who work there, the associates of the organization, big money donors, the people that promote it publicly. They've got corporate partners. They've got big wigs and titans of Silicon Valley and Hollywood. They've got major players and connections to the political class in both parties. Venture capitalists, mainstream media, see it for CNN, NBC, CBS, or you name the mainstream publication, and they've got people writing about Burning Man. The billionaires are going, all these academics, the nexus between Google, Stanford, NASA, Ames, JPL, SRI. You've got very much the transhumanist agenda is being pushed culturally through Burning Man. Less obviously, unless you're looking for it, as the Satanist death of God agenda and the Artilect agenda of merging with these artificial intelligences. If you look at the recent speeches at Burning Man's Global Leadership Conference and European Leadership Conference, this is the guest speakers they get in to talk about how we're all going to merge with the machines. And then the Maker movement as well is kind of like almost the latest incarnation of Burning Man, the new project to start again. All of these things, to me, that make up Burning Man are connected to the man at the very, very highest levels. So why would we think this is a countercultural thing in the first place, right? But it's if you look at how the concept of counterculture was created in the 60s, you see kind of a similar list of institutions and organizations and groupings behind it saying, hey, we're the counterculture.
Right.
So, and I think that's the underlying thesis of this series is that, this is an extension of what went on in the 60s, many of the same people. Speaking of which, here we have John Perry Barlow saying, I spent, this is from 2013, I spent much of the afternoon in conversation with Larry Harvey, the mayor of Burning Man, and General Wesley Clark, who is here. So that's General Wesley Clark, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces in Europe for NATO, and ran for president. Guys like that showing up at Burning Man. You have David de Rothschild tweeting about, hey, you guys will really need to kick in your money to fund this temple at Burning Man. It's like, are you kidding me? The Rothschilds asking for handouts, but I guess that's why they got the money, right? But and then you have the Simpsons. A guy called Tubatron is one of the founders of the Simpsons, and he's a big time burner. Gone more than 20 times. And they did an article or an episode portraying Burning Man recently with Marge taking some LSD and Maggie playing with a syringe and, all good, wholesome family kind of stuff. Here we've got P. Diddy at the bottom of the screen. He's a big burner now. And we even have Bill Clinton holding up a BlackRock Ranger badge for a photo op. I've tried to see if that's fake, photoshopped or not. It possibly could be, but it sort of looks legit to me as well. I don't know. But the point is that this is burning with the man. The man is literally there, just like a Bohemian Grove. So some of the mysteries of Burning Man, who came up with the name? And there's all different stories about that, as we've shown previously. And the three oldest founders of Burning Man and some of the other people around from the old days, we all call it Burning Man, but they call it Burning Man. And it's a very, very interesting distinction. And I've noticed it in probably 5-6 different people, including Larry Harvey's girlfriend at the time or just before he started it all. She called it that too, Burning Man. And it sort of suggests the transhumanism was there from the beginning, that it all is all about Burning Man, the end of man, and the changing images of man. At the end of it, it all burns, and the new man is the cyborg robot Google hybrid, driving an Uber.
Driving an Uber.
And another mystery: why are there so many people involved with military backgrounds, and why do they hide these backgrounds from burners? And this is the biggest event on federal land, but how can the biggest event on government property be so rife with drugs? Surely, isn't that a contradiction when there's a war on drugs? And two of the three Burning Man founders claim to have been federal fugitives. 2 out of 3. How can federal fugitives be running something that requires such massive government and police cooperation? Why is there so much secrecy involved? Really, really a great deal of secrecy. Why do they insist on children being present? Even in the face of all kinds of negative publicity and political pressure, the local community up there does not want children present at all. Many burners don't want it. It's only a small percentage of burners that even have children, but they're very insistent on that. And then this one that really, I think, got me intrigued in this whole story in the beginning, when I noticed that Burning Man has online trolls. And the methodology they use is one that you're very familiar with, and anyone that follows your page, Jan, that we see this all the time. There is a playbook for these trolls, and these people come out and they stick to the playbook, which I can understand if I'm talking about geoengineering or some controversial topic. But this is a rave, so who cares what people? Why would you go to the trouble and instead of having online trolls and using the same playbook? And then why disseminate propaganda and misinformation in the first place? I mean, because it's funny. That's their funny joke, that it's ironic to have propaganda. I mean, it's actual propaganda they're using. Why all the profiling, the census, the academic studies? And if people want to know more about that, watch the episode of Unspun Jan and I did, looking through the Burning Man census. It's really quite hilarious.
Making sense of nonsense.
Making sense of the nonsense, yeah. And the thing about Burning Man is that they call it home. It's really, they really, really love to push this idea that it's home. But if it's only there for 1 week a year, why is it home? If it's a temporary and it's experiment, why is it home? And I've got a pie chart here from a recent census that says 10% of burners consider it to be their main home. So they identify more with that 1 week in this fairy tale utopian society than their regular lives. And then about half, it's their second home. So it's only a very, very minority that say, no, I don't consider it to be my home. That's a mystery to me. There's an insistence on fresh meat, and the veteran burners that have been there 10, 15 years, they're not so exciting anymore. Their concerns. I think we kind of feel that we built this city because it's entirely voluntary. Burning Man doesn't provide anything. All of the art, all the entertainment, everything is provided by the burners. But the burners themselves, it's like, yeah, see you later. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, because they really want to get these fresh, young 15, 16-year-old minds. That's who they really want to bring in, the new burners, the virgins. And every year it's just about 40% of the people going to Burning Man are going for the first time. Why do the founders consider themselves social engineers? What's social engineering when all they do is pick a theme? Then we have this one director resigned in 2008. I have the tweet down there. The 6-person TON team that controls Burning Man was reduced to 5 with the resignation of 1 member. Now, that woman is still there. I mean, who resigns and is still there 10 years after resigning? That's weird. And why is it a tontine? We've talked about that before. It's an archaic corporate structure that was used to set up the Grand Lodge of Freemasonry and to finance the expeditions of the British East India Company. It's really associated with the Navy, this structure. But that's very strange. And then, the founders, they gave it away. They gave it away to a non-profit. And in doing that, they got 2 valuations done by accountants. One said Burning Man was worth, it's about this. It was about $6 million. The other one said it was worth about $8 or $9 million. When they gave it away, they went on the books as the lowest possible valuation. Not only did they give it away for the lowest valuation, but they hurt themselves on the tax deduction as well. And now you can say, oh, well, it's just being conservative. But it's very strange behavior, and it's certainly a mystery to me. I mean, the one thing they call Burning Man an experiment. It never really changes. It's since 1999. It's been the exact same layout and the same sort of thing going along. They're even starting to recycle their themes now. So what's the experiment if Burning Man itself is always the same? And they say it's not about commerce, but it's very clearly a recruiting ground and testing ground for Silicon Valley. So, how can it not be about commerce? They say it's changing the world. Well, how? How's Burning Man changing the world? And why is it desirable that the world should be changed by a bunch of merry pranksters doing acid tests?
Yeah, for sure.
So we're not going to solve all of these mysteries today or in the series, but we're going to delve deeper into some of them, and particularly on the theme of burning with the man. So this is one of the biggest mysteries to me, is at some point it changed from a bonfire, a dozen hippies on a beach burning a little statue, to a project. And this photograph at the bottom left is of the Burning Man project in 1996. You can see that, at least by some, it was considered a project in 1996. Just like Google went to Burning Man and then returned from it and incorporated it as a company, Burning Man itself, the Burning Man project, it incorporated as a company, Black Rock City LLC, in 1997. So it was a project before it was a company. And it's a project again today, but it's a project for whom and to do what? A project has a budget, it has a project manager, it has a defined set of objectives and outcomes and deliverables, time frame, scope. What are all those things for the Burning Man project? And I've put up here a 1958 directive from the Department of Defense. And the purpose is to provide within the Department of Defense an agency for the direction and performance of certain advanced research and development projects. And so they created a thing called the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which we all know as DARPA. And DARPA is pretty closely connected to the tech industry and pretty heavily involved in Burning Man. So ring the coincidence meter for this one. Somebody's calling this thing a project, and the Defense Department's Advanced Research Projects Agency is got people that are involved in it. That could be more than a coincidence. But Larry Harvey, the founder, quoted in This Is Burning Man, he says, To affix great significance to the first act is like looking for the tiniest trickle of a tributary that eventually flows down into the Mississippi, and confusing that for the mighty Mississippi. In fact, it's the sum of 1,000 tributary waters. There were all these things that led to that simple act in the beginning and disposed us to continue acting in certain ways. So he's basically admitting there that it didn't all come from him, and it came from a lot of different directions at once that were all tied together. Now, this slide here, we don't have enough time to get into it too much tonight. I'd actually maybe like to save this for a future episode, Jan, and where we talk about the secret societies and stuff. But just mentioning in passing, one of the biggest elements that the lineage of Burning Man that you could trace would be the Discordians. And David Livingstone has done some great work recently looking at the Fascist International and their relationship to the Discordian movement and even the alt-right media. I'd encourage people to go have a look at his work there. It's quoted in the notes to this slide. There's the idea of the Krampus Christmas, this horned goat god. And then Burning Man and the Cacophony Society got very, very into the Santas as well. And I've got an image there from a police report about a whole bunch of Santas descending in Portland for a Christmas Santa pub crawl. And this came out of the Cacophony Society. The idea of Fight Club came out of the Cacophony Society as well. The idea of the Zone Trip 4 was when they went out to the desert for the first Burning Man, came from a movie by Andrei Tarkovsky called Stalker. And in the Stalker movie, the Zone is actually this kind of sentient being that people go out there to interact with. There's a bunch of different art things and movements that interact as well, and of particular significance, survival research laboratories, the Billboard Liberation Front, and also the Suicide Club was kind of the inspiration for Burning Man's Cacophony Society. The Suicide Club came out of the Diggers, this Haight-Ashbury of the 60s. They had a thing called the Communiversity where people would come and teach classes for free. And the Suicide Club was also the name of Jack Parsons' little group that he was doing his amateur rocketry with. So there's another coincidence again that there's a potential link to Parsons. I've got a tweet at the bottom there from Howard Rheingold, and he says Cacophony Society kept calling and emailing Whole Earth. They were prescient and persistent. I just gave in and tried it. So Howard Rheingold is kind of like Stuart Brand's right-hand man. He was the editor of the Whole Earth Review. He wrote the books on virtual reality and smart mobs. And so he's saying there that the Cacophony Society were really, really chasing him. They were persistent. They really wanted to tap into this Stuart Brand techno-merry prankster group to endorse what they were doing. This also comes following the Situationists International and the concept of the Society of the Spectacle, which is a guy called Guy Debord. And the spectacle is the collapse of reality into the streams of images, products, and activities sanctioned by business and bureaucracy. So this is very interesting that the founders of Burning Man claim the Society of the Spectacle as one of their main, shaping and influences, similar to the temporary autonomous zone of Hakeem Bey, aka Peter Lamborn Wilson. This is activities sanctioned by business and bureaucracy. So, in a way, what the Situationists were trying to do was by acting out, real life kind of improvisations, they were trying to draw attention to ironies in society and things like that. They were involved in creating the student revolution in Paris in 1968. So, I think that looking at all of these different movements and influences on Burning Man that fed in, I kind of see a common thread behind them all, and it's the common thread that's behind the Beat Generation and the Merry Pranksters and the Grateful Deads and the Acid Tests, and the same common thread that is behind your work, Jan. And you follow the LSD, probably will link all of these guys together.
It's like following the money trail.
Yeah.
In Woodstock they have a whole Krampus celebration every year.
Right. That would make sense.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, that's probably the underlying line of all of this is, Bavarian witchcraft, even the skull and bones and all that shit, the druids, all that shit coming out of Germany before it ever was started in England.
Yeah.
So moving on to slide 10. So Burning Man is a utopia, and it's sort of the next in a long line of utopias. And the concept of utopia is really mind control through magical thinking. And look, I'm someone from the tech industry. You have a vision for what could be, and then you sell people on the vision. They invest in you, they back you, you build it. If you build it, they will come. The entire tech industry is based around this idea of utopia and creating utopias. But you could even argue that America itself is a utopian vision. And if you look at the founding fathers, they were very inspired by Francis Bacon and the work of the New Atlantis. And it was the idea of having a civilization based on science and reason, the Enlightenment, and America is kind of, an incarnation of that. You've also got the Hellfire Clubs, utopias of their own. A kind of an early version of the internet was the Postal Service, set up by Benjamin Franklin in the US. He's a member of the Hellfire Club. The guy that set up the Postal Service in the UK was the founder of the Hellfire Club. So, there's from the very earliest days, we've got this kind of like cross-state communications mechanism being tied up to pornography, the underworld, illicit sex, all that sort of thing. This is from 17th, 18th century. Crowley's Thelema, coming out of Rabelais' Gargantua, do as thou wouldst is what Rabelais says. Crowley's like, do what thou wilt. Obviously, Woodstock, Maverick, the whole idea of that place that you've talked about. And the hippie communes of the 60s. Now, there were more than 10,000 communes in the US by the end of the 60s. And the common thread connecting these communes together was the Whole Earth catalogue, writing letters into it, see the experiences of other people living in communes. And I'm sure the LSD was a common thread as well, and the marijuana. California itself is a bit of a utopia. And then Esalen, the place of Esalen is a utopia, and then all the cults that have spun out of Esalen or are kind of connected to this Esalen-Stanford nexus we've talked about previously. But all these cults have a utopian vision. I've got a photo here of the Theosophy Palace down in San Diego at Point Loma, and they basically created California, Hollywood, all of this as colonies of this theosophy. And this is, you can see the sort of money that was involved from the buildings and landscaping. I've also got the photo at the bottom there is the Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco in 1917. And to residents of San Francisco, this photo would probably be quite shocking because it's all of these amazing, spectacular buildings do not exist there anymore. They're gone. And actually only one of them remains, which is the Palace of Fine Arts, which you can see at the bottom left of that photograph. But they built this, in the wake of the devastating earthquake, they built this spectacular European palace style in a similar style of architecture to this Theosophy Palace to showcase the West Coast. And this was all, electric light was being displayed, and no one had ever seen a whole city lit up like this before. And this was kind of, one of the early trade fairs. All these trade fairs are utopian visions. Jack Parsons with his Agape Lodge, he had a utopian vision. They're like, we're going to bring about this moonchild from a sex magic ritual, and we're going to make the world a better place. And then, I think since the gold rush, California has been about this vision, and that's translated into Stanford, where the VC venture capital talent agents turn students into tech entrepreneurs and billionaires. You go to Stanford, you might walk out not graduating but become a billionaire. I mean, there aren't too many other colleges in the world that have that vision, and although Stanford doesn't openly say that, that's kind of the implicit value and vision at Stanford to me. And then we have Black Rock City, a world where everyone and everything is free and you can do whatever you will. You know,
do whatever you will.
yeah, I mean it's a utopia. It's a utopia based on Crowleyan values.
Now, regarding this utopia theme here, very quickly, what I wanted to mention is that Neverland and of course autonomous zones both fit into that whole utopian theme.
Right, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And in fact, Peter Lamborn Wilson, one of his books is called Pirate Utopia. And so that's specifically about the temporary autonomous zone. It just goes into some more detail on it.
Right.
So here we have Time magazine special edition book, The 100 Great Places of History, Civilization's 100 Most Important Sites. And I've circled there in red. There's Burning Man right on the cover. It's one of civilization's 100 most important sites. Like, now that's a hell of a statement. And who's making that statement? Well, it's Time magazine. And Time Life, the publisher, the founder is Henry Luce, who, you know,
MK Ultra worked with Gordon Wasson and Dwight Eisenhower, etc., all at the Century Club in New York, and yeah, it's right at the nexus of the intelligence community, right there.
Yeah, and we don't need to go into too much detail between those connections because we've talked about that a lot, but also the Timothy Leary, the MK Ultra reunion video, they credit Henry Luce as being the main behind-the-scenes player in promoting the counterculture and the LSD revolutions.
But it was more than just a book or two. There was something in the wind, and I really wondered.
The first major burst of publicity, is that what you're trying to focus on? Is that the...
Well, there were steps all the way.
Yeah.
Huxley was one of the first.
After we were fired from Harvard, that fall, every major magazine came out with a... There was a cover story in the Saturday Evening Post.
And that spread it.
There were three different stories in Playboy. So that was, it was the firing from Harvard, plus the fact that Henry Luce was somewhere always behind the scenes doing certain things. Plus, so many people have been involved in Los Angeles and so forth. But that was the first big part.
Yeah, Tim was more responsible than anybody for
Tim,
that.
wasn't it the calculated goal of IFF to cause that kind of spreading?
Yeah.
So, ding, 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 coincidence meter, that's who's also now promoting the latest counterculture revolution, the same group. Time magazine. And so Woodward and Bernstein, two very famous American journalists, in 1977, they broke this story in Rolling Stone about the CIA and the media, which we now know today as Operation Mockingbird. And one of the quotes is, by far the most valuable of these associations, according to CIA officials, have been with the New York Times, CBS, and Time Incorporated. So the CIA's most valuable association endorses Burning Man as one of the 100 most important sites of civilization.
And never mind the fake news issue.
Exactly. So we recently, like in the last couple of weeks, Burning Man's been having an event in the National Mall in Washington, D.C. It's called Catharsis. And they had this on Veterans Day, 11/11 at 11:11 a.m. But the event went for the whole weekend. I believe it was music all night. It didn't stop. We have the giant occult obelisk symbol, and underneath it we have the Temple of the Phoenix. They had actually, let me read this from the notes here. The artist who is from George Mason University, he's an ex-military guy, Michael Verdon. He created three effigies: the moon and the sun to represent the passage of time, and an egg to represent renewal. And the theme of the event was our journey home. So this was in the White House 2 days after the election. I'd say everybody involved in organizing it was expecting this to be a great occult pagan celebration for Hillary Clinton, launching the egg and the journey home to the White House and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it turned out to be a healing vigil for catharsis. This isn't just a thing that's going on in the desert. This is going on the National Mall, right in the nation's capital. And, I don't know. To me, it doesn't really get a lot more occult than this. You're burning an effigy of an egg in the Temple of the Phoenix underneath an obelisk. Oh, yeah, and by the way, when they did that, it was the supermoon, the closest the moon has been to the Earth in the last 70 years as well. So a super occult day to be holding this ritual on 11/11/11/11. So where does the story take place? And, we've been going through when, what, where. We're going to really go now to the where of the desert, because Burning Man did begin in San Francisco and it shifted out to the desert. So I've marked a few things on the map. We've got the Presidio where it all got started. And then if you look to the northeast of that, kind of under where the word Nevada is, that's where Burning Man is located. And you can see it's on this incredible dry lake bed that just runs for miles and miles and miles. For people that aren't really familiar with this part of the world, we've got California, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona visible in this map. And Utah, Salt Lake City, the home base of the Mormon faith, all these incredible salt lakes around it. It seems to me that Mormonism sprang off from Freemasonry. And a lot of Mormons are Freemasons. There's a lot of overlap there. But they sort of took over this whole kind of desert area, and enormously influential landowners throughout Nevada and California. Las Vegas is Clark County, and that's set up by Jesse James, the outlaw, who reinvented himself as a Senator Clark later in life. And then around Las Vegas, you've got Nellis Air Force Base and Gunnery Range, which Nevada is actually the state in the U.S. that has the most government-owned land. So it's about 98% federally owned, more than any other state. And probably 70% of the state is military bases. And in particular, the Nellis Gunnery Range, or Topanga, I believe it's called. This is where the Groom Lake is, Area 51. You can also see on the map there Edwards Air Force Base. Now, Edwards Air Force Base is the last place the military officially has a record of our friend Bear Owsley. He signed up at Ellis, and then he signed out at Edwards about a year later, and what he did in between is a complete mystery. But Edwards Air Force Base is a major aerospace testing area. It has the largest runway in the world, and this is one of the landing sites for the space shuttle. If the space shuttle couldn't go to its regular landing site, they'd come and land at Edwards. All kinds of experimental military testing going on between Edwards, between Area 51. Also at the top left of the screen is Mount Shasta, which is another major UFO base. And if you drew a line between Area 51 and Mount Shasta, if you were a UFO that was flying, you would probably fly, in between the Sierra Nevada mountain range that you can see there, and you would fly straight over Burning Man. And if you needed a place to land your spaceship, the area where Burning Man is very long and very, very, very flat. It's ideal emergency landing place for spaceships. And indeed, there have been a number of UFO sightings in the area. We'll come to that a bit later on. Some of the other things about this area of California and Nevada, obviously we've got Hollywood, very famous for that, rock idols and stars. Hollywood is a weapon, just like the internet is a weapon. You've got the moguls and mavens of both. The music industry kind of centered around Los Angeles as well. California is the home of the cults. I'd say more cults have come out of California than any other state. UFOs, aerospace. We also have the Emerald Triangle, which is the area to the north of San Francisco, up to Humboldt County, where we've internationally renowned for Napa Valley and our wines, but go a little bit further north, you get into the marijuana plantations, and that's becoming internationally renowned as well, and really a booming industry within California. Reno has become the new tax haven, and that was featured in Bloomberg as a cover story recently. The Rothschilds setting up all kinds of tax-free structures. Apple has an office there with like 4 people and about $200 billion of cash. And there's the world's largest free trade zone is around Reno as well. So an unlikely spot to be a tax haven. Nevada itself, a lot of stars move there because there's no state income taxes. And if you were interested in money laundering, large casinos are always a good place to be. And what does Nevada have but the biggest of the casinos? We got gambling, we got prostitution. This is the home of the porn industry, the XXX business. There's a lot of agriculture comes out of California: fruits, nuts, vegetables, wine, food. We have all kinds of festivals around these. got the beaches, we've got the bikinis, and we've got the fairy tales, Barbie, and we've got the Disney princess programming, All of this stuff is coming out of California and Nevada, social engineering, and it all convenes at Burning Man. The other thing I'll point out on this slide is about the middle of the slide around the Highway 95, you see NAS Fallon, that's Naval Air Station Fallon. So that's basically over the next mountain range from Burning Man, although that may look like a fair distance on the map. When you're flying a F-22, it's really not that big of a distance at all. And then at the very bottom of this map, I've put down Lookout Mountain and Laurel Canyon. And if anyone watching this is not familiar with Dave McGowan's work on Laurel Canyon, really recommend that. This book is Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. And basically, he's exposed that most of the bands and leading counterculture figures of the 60s had military-industrial complex ties. So, moving along now, this... The 5 phases of Burning Man. This actually were 4 phases of Burning Man as described by Larry Harvey, and then they've recently, Burning Man have made a new announcement that they bought some land in the middle of nowhere, $6.4 million they paid for this ranch that has a geyser and a hot springs on it. It's called Fly Ranch, and they're going to create their own year-round philosophy center out there. They dream up the plans for this at Esalen, and so I've dubbed the place Flysalon. But this is the shift from Burning Man. So it began as really quite a pagan thing. It's an effigy bonfire on the solstice at a nude beach, and it began next to the Presidio, and then it moved out to the gunnery range at Lovelock, and we'll get into that a bit more in a second. But the first phase at the desert was a bunch of these cacophony society freaks and merry prankster hippie types and other artists, other art groups getting involved. But it was sort of a ragtag bunch, if you like, for the first half of the 90s. And then after the Halco event and then their corporate takeover, the team that runs Burning Man now really took over Burning Man in 1997. And everything that's happened since then, has been mostly under this team. And their vision was that we would create little regional spin-offs of Burning Man. And I've got a map there of all the different Burning Man events that there are around the world. I think last year there were 60. So it's starting to become a worldwide thing. The biggest one is in South Africa, which is just under 10,000 people. And then the next biggest one is in Israel. That's about 5,000 or 6,000. They're having a big one in Amsterdam, I think, next year. And so Burning Man started to spread around the world. And then in 2011, when they announced that it's become a non-profit, their vision really became building this worldwide network of burners and using them to affect social and political change, making the world a better place through Burning Man. Here's a quote from Larry Harvey. He says, "I think increasingly the political parties don't matter. I think leaders will rise up in these Burning Man groups, and a new kind of value-based politics, drawing renewal from rituals, will emerge. Then you have a rebirth of democracy, but a different kind of democracy. In the fullness of time, maybe Burning Man will disappear because it will have served its purpose. The children will have left the nursery." Now, this is a very, very strange statement from someone that's founded the world's most popular rave. Like, maybe it'll disappear one time because it served its purpose when the children left the nursery. So he's basically saying that the purpose of Burning Man is to indoctrinate these kids into a new kind of value-based politics where they get their renewal from rituals. So if things are sucky, life's a bit miserable, your Obamacare premiums went up, we'll just go down, do a ritual, we'll burn an effigy in the town square, take some LSD, and you go about your business. It'll all be all right, This is their vision. And if Burning Man is to be a model for a new kind of democracy, there's no voting. The leaders aren't appointed. That's it. It's an absolute tyrannical dictatorship based on secrecy and propaganda where nobody has any money. And I think people should be very, very afraid that the official leader of Burning Man is telling us that this is what the purpose of it is, particularly when you look at, every year 80,000 people being churned out of this machine. So there's a couple of things here. The Burning Man network, that's really what it's all about now. Networks of networks. And the Burning Man network itself is a nebulous, amorphous thing, but it intersects with many, many other networks. The networks of all the people in the Burning Man network all intersect and merge as well. And no one really knows who's in what networks. Moving on to the when does this take place? So it's Labor Day weekend, and a couple of things I want to point out, around the timing of this. In Europe, Labor Day is actually May the 1st, which is the feast of Beltane, Bar being Bar-El, Beltane, and the Kaaba is the stone of Bar. So this is all going back to the ancient god Baal, and they're constructing temples of Baal right now this year, 2016, in New York and London. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if the people behind building these temples of Baal are burners or connected to Burning Man in some way. This date of the European Labor Day is also comes after Walpurgisnacht, the Witches' Night, and that's when the Church of Satan was founded. That's when a lot of these occult things love to start on this feast of Beltane. And including the Illuminati was founded on May Day 1776, which is celebrated as International Workers' Day. So this is socialism, communism, and there's a good argument that can be made of Burning Man being a socialist utopia, since everyone is the same and there's no money involved. In terms of the pagan calendar, Burning Man sort of takes place between Lammas and Marbon, also an area of the time known as Lugnasad. And so traditionally in the Celtic occultism, this time of year they would hold funeral games as basically a way of worshipping the gods to favour them for their harvest. And there'd be a truce among kings. So kings wouldn't fight with each other. They'd come together in these funeral games around death and rebirth and the harvest in this period. Burning Man, when it began on Baker Beach, it was in the North Solstice, June 21st, 1986. And that's obviously a popular satanic and Wicca date, the summer solstice. A lot of pagan things happen on the summer solstice, and they made no secret of that. Now it goes on. It's the first week of school after the holidays for probably not every state, but for many schools. And so for all the kids that are encouraged to come there, well, parents have to take the kids out of school to go. It also makes it kind of hard for college kids to go, and that's really interesting because you'd sort of think that might be the demographic they want, but they're looking for, perhaps the college kids are too smart to figure it out. I don't know, but it's also a similar timing traditionally to the Democratic and Republican conventions, and there's a lot of political overlap with Burning Man. I sort of wonder if this was a way that the senators and the political bigwigs could go to their convention and party their asses off and send all their staffers away to Burning Man so that they're not aware of exactly what sort of partying is going on. I don't know. I just point that out as an interesting coincidence, and a more significant coincidence, I think, is that the Fleet Week for the Navy in San Francisco is when all of the ships come into town, and there's the Blue Angels do air shows, everything like that. Well, that's always the same week as Burning Man's official after party that they call decompression. And the decompression changes every year. Fleet Week changes every year, but always the same. So that's a hell of a coincidence there with Burning Man sinking in with the Navy. And the other thing is it sort of starts on St. Bartholomew's Day, which is interesting because that's another satanic holiday. There was an enormous massacre in France ordered by Catherine de' Medici on St. Bartholomew's Day, and blood ran in the streets. There's a fair to basically held in honor of St. Bartholomew, the Bartholomew Fair, held in the city of London at the last week of August, the time of year of Burning Man, from 1133 until 1855. And in this fair, they featured musicians, acrobats, freaks, wild animals, puppets, and sideshows. It was suppressed in 1855 for encouraging debauchery and public disorder. So Burning Man is the same time as this ancient fair from the city of London about debauchery, public disorder, and freaks. And the fair was set up by this guy called Rahare, who's like the original court jester. He's almost like the god of clowns, and he created a leper hospital, which brings in the whole Knights Templars, the orders of lepers, and things like that. Like, you wanted to say something, Jan?
Ding ding.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And then St. Bartholomew comes up in Bacon's New Atlantis. It's actually he's traveling and discovers this, or someone discovers this island of Bensalem dedicated to St. Bartholomew in this world of reason and natural philosophy. So it's Bartholomew Fair is kind of tied to Utopia. I mean, I'm not saying this is evidence. This I'm drawing a long bow, but certainly there's a lot of coincidence going on with the timing of Burning Man. Drilling into this timeline, so down in 1989 is when the Cacophony Society first got involved with Burning Man. That's different from the official history, but I'm taking that from court testimony. I believe that overrides propaganda and evidence weight. And this is when it was first called Burning Man. So that it wasn't until the fourth Burning Man that they actually named the thing Burning Man, which is unusual. And I've brought up this pattern in an earlier part that a lot of these military things spinning into the civilian world, they seem to have 3 meetings, and then on the fourth one, they go open to the public. On the fifth one, it was shut down by the park police, who wouldn't let them set fire to the figure. Quite a big crowd was drawn. And so they took the man, they dismantled it, they took it to a parking lot where it was later accidentally chopped up with chainsaws. Now, that's the official story. I wouldn't be surprised if they took it to Bohemian Grove or somewhere and had some kind of, secret satanic ritual burning of it that possibly was illegal. But I got no evidence of that. The official story is they chopped this thing up with chainsaws and then built another one and took it out to the Nevada desert with the Cacophony Society. So these are a bunch of unemployed landscape gardeners and bicycle couriers and things like that. There's a lot of timber involved in building a 30, 40-foot high statue. I mean, in recent years, they've been spending more than $250,000 a year to build this thing. But let's say back in those days, it was like 15, 20 grand, even 10 grand. That's still a lot of money for these guys to scrape together twice, just in the name of a lark. So it sort of raises the possibility that there were other people involved that were bankrolling this thing from, as early as 1990. I've got a quote here, a tweet from Howard Rheingold, again, Stuart Brand's sort of right-hand man. He says, in 1989, when Burning Man was still at Baker Beach, I put it on the back cover of Whole Earth Review. Now, here's another contradiction. It's very interesting. You can see this thing, Burning Man, see inside back cover. That's actually from the 1991 issue of Whole Earth Review. And I've bought every 1989 and 91 issue and then scanned through some other ones online. The only mention of Burning Man that I could ever find was from their 1991 issue. But we've got Howard Rheingold a bit earlier saying that, the Cacophony Society people were really approaching him a lot and really wanting him to get involved with the marketing of it. So the difference between 1989 and 1991 for Burning Man is one's in the desert and one's in the beach. And here he's saying he put it on the back cover when it was still at the beach. So, I mean, did he make the decision to put it on there in 1989 and it didn't come for 2 years? I don't know. That's a mystery, but it's another contradiction. And it's interesting that the contradictions here come from the Stuart Brand group. The feature that was written in the Whole Earth Review that he put in was created by a guy called Louis Brill, and he's the founder of the Cacophony Society. So he was very, very heavily involved back in those days. We might come to talk about him a bit more in a future episode. In 1993, Burning Man had their first propaganda minister. They launched a radio station and a newspaper. 1993. So this is like their third 01. Maybe their fourth one in the desert. And already they've got a minister for propaganda. It's like, wow. I mean, at this point, there were 300 or 400 people. Like, there was really no need to control the crowd through propaganda in any way other than to do such experiments. In 1995, Wired magazine puts it on the cover, and we'll look at this in a second. 1995 was the first mention of it. 96 is on the cover, and 96 is when they have the Halco ritual. Somebody ends up dead. 3 people end up seriously injured. If you do a bunch of black occult magic, these kind of terrible things can happen. And then in 1997, basically the women took over. Burning Man's had, the female CEO or whatever her title is, Marion Goodell, since then. ABC Nightline did a piece saying that Burning Man is the physical manifestation of the internet. And then actually in 97, it was the one time ever that Burning Man was held on private land. By 1998, they had an installation at City Hall in San Francisco, and I've actually got a photo of that there. You can see the man glowing and lit up in front of City Hall. So despite the fact that, they had this satanic ritual, someone was died, 3 people were seriously injured, it's still welcomed with open arms and put in front of City Hall, and this is still in pretty early days of Burning Man. And in 1998, Marvel Comics published X-Force 75, and I've got a couple of shots of it down there, where they go to Burning Man. And Marvel Comics in itself is interesting because Jack Parsons, the ultimate occultist founder of JPL, his real name is Marvel Whiteside Parsons. And Marvel Comics did a comic on Jack Parsons saying Marvel Whiteside Parsons, all talking about Aleister Crowley. And he's got the pentagram on the rocket on the cover of that comic. The actual rocket design that Jack Parsons did for the JATO, his first powdered explosive rocket, the powder's packed inside a pentagram. So he has that 5-pointed star, at the core of everything he does. And they knew that to put that on the Marvel Comics magazine about him. So the other thing that's interesting about the Marvel Comics X-Force is the artist who drew it is actually a friend of mine. And so when I found out that it was him, I had to check. I'm like, dude, is this you? And that's his response there. Like, yeah, he drew a comic about Burning Man a full decade before he even went. I mean, how does this come about? That you just, Marvel Comics is like, we must do feature Burning Man in one of our episodes. And then why do they get an artist who doesn't even get to go to Burning Man? I don't know. It's quite a mystery, but maybe we'll just ding the coincidence meter again.
Ding ding.
And so here's the Wired thing, and I was on this Hot Wired mailing list. This is probably where I first heard about Burning Man when I got this thing in my email inbox. It says Burning Man 95 party for pyros. Take 5,000 tattooed punks, beer-crazed hicks, buck-naked techno-pagans, and sun-stroked pyromaniacs. Add the scorching Nevada desert, gasoline-spewing automatons, crunchy music, ancient visionary medicines, mud, and rocket-powered jalopies. Stir for 3 days, set everything on fire, and you have the Burning Man Festival 95. So, yeah, the buck-naked techno-pagans and beer-crazed hicks. Like, if beer-crazed hicks went to Burning Man now, they would be ostracized and shunned. That's the last thing that Burning Man wants, despite their radical inclusion as beer-crazed hicks. But that's just whoever showed up was who made the crowd back in the days. By 1997, Burning Man's Wired magazine has done another story about Burning Man. So they're really promoting Burning Man very heavily. But by 1997, the headline is Burning Man Burn Out. So this idea that, we've had enough of Burning Man and Burning Man's done and Burning Man's over, it sort of seems like they built this in from the beginning because they knew that, in anything, it's inevitable that call would come up. And so they could just say, well, people have been saying that from the very start, and we're still here. Who cares? But the other thing that I find quite interesting is also 1997, Wired launched a print publication division called Hot Wired. And the first book that Wired prints in hard copy physical form is this book about Burning Man in 1997. And in this book, the introduction to it says, in 1955, the family of man envisioned humanity in its emerging global village. Now, Burning Man captures humanity celebrating newly found opportunities, an explosion of expression, the deep desire to create, and the ecstatic rediscovery of the body in a networked world. Award-winning designer John Plunkett combines hundreds of incredible photos with 6 essays to showcase the digital revolution's infectious optimism for a better world. So we've talked about the family of man in an earlier episode and this concept of the democratic surround, that this comes directly out of intelligence propaganda operations to create immersive environments to deliver cultural values to people. And it's very interesting to me that as early as 97, when Burning Man was barely getting started, they're already directly and deliberately linking it back to those operations. And how did they know that? I mean, another coincidence. Ding ding. So let's take a bit of a look comparing Burning Man and the burners to the 60s and all the similarities that there are. There's a utopian vision. In the 60s it was turn on, tune in, drop out, and at Burning Man it's have a transformational experience. They say we're making the world a better place, so that's the Silicon Valley mantra. And if you watch the TV show Silicon Valley, they have a funny episode exactly on that. There's the concept that they're rebelling against the man. When you go to Woodstock, when you go to Burning Man, that you are not one of these suits working for the government in this grey world. You're one of these colourful free people indulging in liberty. And there's the idea of rejecting the status quo. Walking away from the squares and the straights and the old timers. They want to flaunt the convention with their hair and clothing, so they're rejecting mainstream fashions and things like that, and they're dressing their own kind of in-your-face controversial way to identify themselves. They got bright fluoro colors. There's lots of thrift store and vintage mixed in with other elements. There's a leather and feather sort of neo-tribal revival type look. There's very simplistic, nature-oriented, carnal kind of values. Do what thou wilt, embrace your body, get naked. There's a music subculture attached to it. It's not just a bunch of young people going to an event. They're following certain bands, and that's what they play at each other's houses and things. There's a political counterculture element to it as well. And, in the 60s, we have this famous image of the lady putting the flower in the barrel of a gun.
Bernie Boston's photo op at the Pentagon. Right.
And so the people there, they felt that they were making an important political statement. But it was really quite ineffective politically, and it wasn't taken seriously by the political establishment in any way. The only people taking it seriously were the people doing the LSD, having the free sex, participating in it, thinking that they were making the world a better place.
And that was all staged by Walter Boart with the help of Marshall McLuhan and those at the East Village Other. And it was also funded by the Mellon banking heiress, Peggy Mellon Hitchcock.
Of course, right. And so that's sort of tapping into disenfranchisement with the existing political system. And the idea is if you're on the outside, if you're on the fringes, if you don't really fit in and conform, come into us, come to our group where everything is one. Be a part of us, just drop out. And, in the 60s, the drop out really meant go to communes, just get out of the city and don't protest in the streets. And at Burning Man, drop out sort of means, going to Burning Man itself, you drop out. But, there are people that really, really get into this lifestyle, and many of them moved to Reno to be closer to Burning Man, to be closer to art projects, or in an attempt to live this Burning Man lifestyle year round. And now that Burning Man does have a permanent base, there's probably going to be even more of that. Another similarity is the drugs, and the drugs are being sold to these kids about exploring consciousness. Here is a tool to unlock new dimensions in your mind, give you the powers of a Superman, if you can master the tool. And then the people who are exploring the consciousness, well, they call them psychonauts, these great heroic adventurers.
Absolutely.
You also find the similarity of, group sex and free love and this polyamory, LGBT-friendly kind of swinger lifestyle. That's very present within the burner community, and that's very present in the 60s as well. Just the concept of free love in general, that love is something you give to everyone. You give it to strangers. You give it to the policeman who's beating you with a truncheon. You give it to everyone. It's just love, man. And we're going to have hugs, not bombs, I mean, it's a nice thought. Anyone that doesn't like that thought is mean. But if you look at the history of human civilization, with Burning Man being the pinnacle of human civilization, according to Time magazine, it didn't really work. Like, Genghis Khan's come to burn your village. You're like, hey, look, let's just hug it out. It doesn't work. It's, they laugh. And yet this is taken extremely seriously by these people. There's a real aversion to conflict, and that goes part of this everything is one.
The whole Bliss Bunny thing,
Yeah, and cuddle puddle, and
Cuddle puddle.
don't be controversial. Don't bring your politics to the playa. Take some ecstasy and wear a furry robe and snuggle up. And all your problems are burned to the ground.
The whole positive thinking movement, and I did a show on that way back at the beginning of the show.
Yep. So. A lot of similarities to the 60s. And what about to the acid tests? Is Burning Man the modern acid tests? Well, it's an acid test it's outdoors and it's on a mass scale. Everyone participates. And I've got the Burning Man ticket there. You voluntarily assume the risk of serious injury or death by attending. I mean, what a perfect disclaimer for the acid tests, right? It's like, if anything happens to you here, you've already opted in by purchasing the ticket, assuming the liability, and then making the pilgrimage and journey to get there in the first place.
Yeah, how they're handling the human experiments now compared to the 50s and 60s is totally different. Now they actually get consent. It's like this guy... Darren Brown on British TV.
Right, yeah.
And he gets everybody to consent before he does these huge mind control experiments on them. And the guy is, I'm guessing 99% chance he's MI6,
That wouldn't surprise me. The key thing is this word participate on the ticket. Everybody participates, You're part of it. By going to it, you're part of it. That's it. You're either in or you're out. And that's like the Merry Prankster bus, you're on the bus or you're not. The sort of drugs that they're doing here, it's more the LSD, mushrooms, DMT, what I call the McKenna-Leary spectrum. There's a lot of drugs at Burning Man, and I'm sure all drugs are there. But it's not really so much, heroin, speed, cocaine. There's other parties and events that you go to where it's quite obvious that people are more on those types of drugs, whereas Burning Man is more along the lines of the acid. It's hard to snort things and inject things in this dusty, windy, dry desert environment. There's a lot of designer drugs there. There's medical papers that get written from things they found at Burning Man and submit to medical journals. The medical team there has access to mass spectrography machines, and so they're sampling things. And students and faculty, they've got access to the Stanford, Berkeley, and corporate, chemical labs around the Bay Area, and they know how to use it,
Checking for Sasha Shulgin's inventions on the spot.
Well, that's right. I mean, he was there behind, when the original acid tests are going on, but also many of those other acid chemists that were trained by him. We'll come to him in a minute. You've got the use of lighting and lasers, projections, strobes, all kinds of things like this to create hypnotic patterns and, to drag your attention in. Repetitive and electronic sounds with fragments of voices, and noises, pseudo-mystical phrases. These are elements incorporated into the acid tests that are incorporated into many art installations of Burning Man as well. You wouldn't say that Burning Man exists solely to present fragments of voices to people, but you get a Burning Man and you're going to get that. You've got the drum circles. You've got a mixture of live instruments being mixed in with electronic instruments. People running around in ironic costumes, like they're wearing a pith helmet or a Ruritarian military uniform, dressing like, feudal lords or Louis XIV. There's possibility that psychoacoustic testing and parapsychology testing could be going on at Burning Man, as it was around the groups of people in the Stanford Research Institute behind the acid tests. We have the Institute of Noetic Sciences is out at Burning Man testing the magic field there. We'll come back to that one a bit later on. And when you're at Burning Man, you're living inside this unusual city. The regular rules don't apply. It's not a normal thing. You know that from the moment you get there. The acid test as well is like when you're at it, it's not a normal festival. It's not a normal event. It's an acid test, man. Everyone drank the punch, man. And so both the acid test and Burning Man have been used to test emerging technologies, such as related to multimedia, recording, broadcast, logistics. And then we have Stuart Brand, the founder of the Trips Festival, also the founder of the Long Now Foundation. They have this 10,000-year clock, and they're very, very interested in the cycle of time over different different paces and scales. And moving on to the next slide, let's drill into Stuart Brand a little bit more. So there's Stuart Brand talking to Larry Harvey, this photo of the top right. And, you know, out of those two guys, one of them is the mastermind of Burning Man. And I think it's very hard to make a case that it's Larry Harvey. You know, I just don't think he's smart enough. But this other guy, Stuart Brand, pretty much everything that's happened in technology since the 60s and the counterculture, he's been there somehow behind it. I mean, that's one hell of a coincidence. He's a merry prankster, you know, participant and even organizer of the acid tests, you know, and he's bringing the equipment to do, you know, the funny lighting and projection stuff. He's brought those ideas from USCO. I've mentioned Fred Turner's work on the democratic surround, and yeah, he's from counterculture to cyberculture. He really looks specifically at Stuart Brand and how these ideas came from the Black Mountain College on the East Coast, John Cage and the happenings kind of stuff that was going on at Mills College a little bit as well. That came over and was manifested. San Francisco Tape Music Center coming out of Mills College. These are the groups that came together to set up these acid tests. And Stuart Brand was kind of like, you know, the technical lighting projection guy running around with that. He came out of Phillips Exeter Academy, which is one of the most elite prep schools in the country. Mark Zuckerberg, from the Facebook founder, also came out of the same academy. And then he went to Stanford. He studied anthropology, got a degree majoring in biology. Then he left and went to Ranger School, and he was in ROTC. He entered the Army as a lieutenant, was involved in training troops in Fort Dix, New Jersey, but also somehow became the Army's most senior photographer. He's a parachutist, and he trained in leadership and small unit management. So he's come out of the Pentagon and then directly into SRI, the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Lab, and then going on to found the Whole Earth Catalog, the TRIPS Festival, the Well, which was the precursor to the World Wide Web. He's the founder of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He founded the Global Business Network, Wired Magazine, and Mondo 2000. He was very involved in the creation of them, the Long Now Foundation. He's the guy who coined the term personal computer, the cameraman at the mother of all demos, which is when the modern windowing desktop was displayed to the world in 1968, long before Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were given it. He's invented the signature image of a picture of the Earth from space, the Whole Earth Catalog, on an acid trip, he says. This is the first example of desktop publishing. It inspired Alan Kay, who was at Xerox PARC. He designed the first browser. And it's inspired Douglas Engelbart, who's at SRI. You know, these guys are taking the acid as well. Steve Jobs taking the acid. He says the Whole Earth Catalog was Google 36 years before there was a Google. Stuart Brand's been linked to Gregory Bateson. He's part of the Sausalito houseboats community with Alan Watts, an advisor to Jerry Brown. He knew Timothy Leary when he was at Millbrook, and he knew Ram Dass from Perry Lane. And then when he created the Well, that's Larry Brilliant, the Grateful Dead's doctor, who then went on to head Google.org, Google's philanthropy division. So Stuart Brand, he's someone who's pretty informed, I think, to speak about technology, the counterculture, the acid tests. Here's what he says about Burning Man. Burning Man, they've surpassed in every way the various things we were attempting with the acid tests and the TRIPS Festival. Burning Man has realized with such depth and thoroughness and ongoing originality and ability to scale and minimalist rules, but enough rules that you can function. And all the things we were farting around with, Larry Harvey has really pulled off. I don't think that would have come to pass without going through whatever that spectrum of the 60s was, the prism of the 60s, the spectrum of bright light colors that we espoused for a while. It all got exacerbated by the internet and sequence of computer-related booms, but I think it flavored a whole lot of the basic nature of Burning Man. So there's the founder of the acid test telling you that Burning Man is the ultimate realization of everything they tried to do in the acid test. So where is this? This is Black Rock City, and I've in the top right of the picture there is an image of what is known as the Black Rock, the sort of monolithic mountain rising out of the desert. It's the largest area of flat land in the US, and it's an interesting coincidence that we have Black Rock being, also the Kaaba stone, We have the Rockefeller and their investment company. Venrock was the first venture capital company. And then we have BlackRock and Blackstone, two absolute giant investment groups as well, possibly associated with the banking cartel, and then they have the banking cartel setting up a tax haven in this area. The area where Burning Man is, if you look at the bottom left of the screen, you can see what they call the playa, although it's not a beach, but it's a dried lake bed. And it's an ancient lake bed, but it actually gets covered in water every single year. So the waste that gets caught and picked up at Burning Man, they might find some waste that's actually been shaken loose from the rains of the previous season, and it could be from 40 years ago. It's not necessarily coming from the burners. It's right next to a place called Pyramid Lake, where they have another rival festival now called Symbiosis Gathering, and I've got a photo there of the pyramid, this mysterious three-sided mound that looks extremely pyramid-shaped, just rising out of a lake. It's an area sacred to the Paiute tribe, and there's a cave nearby, quite a famous cave called the Lovelock Cave, and it was found full of architectural treasures in 1912 and completely looted. They excavated 250 tons of guano, which is bat droppings, which was mined, and they found these remains and skeletons, including mummies. So a lot of artifacts, like possibly as many as 10,000 artifacts, mummies, everything, and then all the stuff just vanished, just disappeared. And I've got some links to this slide that lead a little bit further into the story of that. But the local Paiute lady named Sarah Winnemucca was the chief of this tribe. And she wrote a book in the 1800s called Life Among the Paiutes, in which she told the stories of this tribe of the Sitika, which was red-headed giants, 10 foot tall. And her tribe had interacted with these tribe for hundreds of years, and even interbred with them to see if they were species that could produce children. And she wore a royal cloak that was lined with the red hair of these giants. And their story is that they chased them to a cave and then basically shot flaming arrows inside the cave. The giants ran from the smoke, and they were all shot when they tried to escape, and the mouth of the cave was covered. So it sort of fits the story of Lovelock Cave. And you could say, oh, well, this is all crap. There was no giants found, but why did all these mummies vanish? Why did all these skeletons vanish? I mean, it's absolutely certain that this stuff was found and was exhibited, but what's uncertain is what happened to it. And there is apparently in the area, if you find the right people and ask nicely enough, there is a giant hand bone that's been preserved that you can see. I haven't seen it yet. But anyway, there's some weird stuff going on in this part of the world. It's very, very tough physical conditions, kind of perfect for trauma-based mind control and causing suffering on people. You're faced with extremes of heat and cold. The desert gets really hot in the day, and then around about 3-4 in the morning, it's absolutely freezing. The winds there can gust extremely highly, and big wind gusts can come out of nowhere. Massive, massive dust storms can come where you can't see the bicycle that you're riding on, and you that's it. You're literally trapped in the desert. You have no idea what's north, what's west, which way's up. It can be quite a dangerous environment. You get breathing difficulties from all of this hard playa dust, which is extremely alkaline. You get sleep deprivation. There's the high noise levels and the heat mean that whatever your regular sleep cycle is, you're probably not going to be able to keep it at Burning Man. And then there's no food or water provided. So it's like really the most unlikely place for a popular music event that you can think of. And the alkaline environment is also extremely hard on electronic and electrical equipment. And as a result of that, there's a lot of testing of that type of equipment that goes on there, by the people who are making it, who are burners, like, hey, why don't we bring it to Burning Man and see if it works? So this is an aerial shot from Google Earth of the playa. You can see the town of Gerlach on Highway 447 at the bottom, and then you can see Black Rock City itself, the shape of the city visible from space, and absolutely nothing around this for miles. Absolutely nothing. And would you believe there's still noise complaints? So this is from the 2015 official documentation from the Bureau of Land Management. The temporary city is officially open for 192 hours. So in 2015, that was August the 30th to September the 7th. But the temporary closure area, which goes, it's the area with the crosshatched lines on the screen there, it's about 14,000 acres. And that goes between August the 10th and September 21st, which it's significant that, they end that area belonging to them on the fall solstice. There are other rituals that go on at Burning Man outside of the official hour of Burning Man. And it wouldn't surprise me if there are secret rituals that not many people know about, but I've got no evidence of that. But I do know that there are some other effigy burn rituals. Their final cleanup on their permit is required to be done by October the 7th. So they're basically taking over this area of the world for about 3 months. 70,000 paying participants, 10 to 15,000 volunteers, more than 30,000 vehicles going there, probably more than 4,000 children, 1,600 porta potties, 30 pump trucks working 24/7, pumping all the RVs. The porta potties still get blogged and are pretty gnarly out there in the desert. There's an airport. The airport, actually, I think in 2016 did 2,300 passengers. Burning Man even have their own airline now called Burner Air Express, and they fly people in from the Bay Area and from Reno, so you can land directly at Burning Man. From where it says on the image there, the man with the red dot in the center, to the inner playa, so the esplanade, the start of the ring of the city, that's 1 mile. So this is quite large. The perimeter around the Pentagon fence that surrounds it is 9 miles long, and there's about 600 different what they call mutant vehicles. This is the art cars of Burning Man. They drive around. You can ride on them. You can dance on them. A lot of them play music and light up at night. Their emergency department processes 6,100 medical patients per year. So you've got about a 1 in 10 chance of going to the medical tent if you go to Burning Man. And yeah, that's a lot greater. I mean, I've been to hundreds of raves and never been to the medical tent or even any of my friends. So 1 in 10 is pretty high. And in 2015, they were 31 calls to the fire department of fires breaking out that had to be put out. And 4,500 911 calls. So yeah, it's kind of busy like any city. Here's a great aerial photo of Burning Man, and one thing that I want to point out here is, and I've mentioned this in earlier episodes, is the relationship between Burning Man and Bauhaus, and this idea that you'd have these big wide streets. Like in the top right there, I have a picture of Tel Aviv in Israel that was built on these Bauhaus principles. But the people of the city, they would come together in the streets, and the life of the city would be in the streets where you ran into your neighbors. And where everybody lived was kind of a very conformist, everything's the same, but you decorate your own space on the inside any way that you want. And so there's this sort of regular grid-like pattern to Burning Man that it makes it easier to navigate in many ways as well. But you get a sense here of really just how vast this thing is. This is a shot of Burning Man from above. You can clearly see that it is in a pentagon, and I've talked about some of the occult elements of the shape before, like the Bennu bird. And you get a sense of this of how vast and flat this playa space really is. Can you see my mouse cursor there?
Yes.
Okay. So in the middle there is the man, the Burning Man, and then this here at the end of it at the 12 o'clock position, that is the temple. And so this side of things over here that's kind of where most of the sound camps are, and then over on this bit as well. This here in the middle is the center camp, and then the founders of Burning Man are sort of all clustered around this area here. So it's different. There's the family zone is kind of, I think, over this area. So it's divided into different areas. You can camp where you want, but they kind of do try to get people to be in similar places together. So the shape of Burning Man is this hemicycle shape. This is what it's called, and we see this shape cropping up again and again and again. The big picture here is the United Nations Security Council. They use the hemicycle. The city of Amsterdam has been laid out in a very similar hemicycle grid-based pattern to Burning Man, and Amsterdam is one of the first master planned cities. The United Nations logo itself has a hemicycle of the laurel wreath wrapped around the side. We have the theatre of Dionysus in ancient Greece. Hemicycle was employed there and for many of these outdoor amphitheatres, and the European Parliament as well. So, I mean, nothing particularly significant, but there's some more interesting coincidences there. And then the layout of Burning Man. If you look at this, is the centre cap seen from Google Earth, and you'll notice that it really has a keyhole kind of shape to it, which looks almost identical to the Vatican. St. Peter's Square is basically the same keyhole shape. And then I have a clip. I think we might have used it, but I guess we could play it again. The other parts were so many months ago now. Let's play a clip about how basically the Burning Man designers stole these ideas from other architecture around the world.
So the city design has evolved over time, but the thing that's really interesting is, first of all, it's made with wooden stakes and survey flags. That's how we define the roads. But as you notice, these radial streets, oops, I can do it here too, that come down, they all look towards a man. So everybody's experience when they're at Burning Man, sort of a tickle in the back of their psyche, is, wow, I'm at Burning Man. You kind of can't forget it. So I better enjoy every moment. I better be immediate. I better be here. I better be present. And it just kind of sinks into who you are, of course, until it burns on Saturday night. And then that's a whole other story. But the psyche, the design of always feeling like you're part of something is extremely important. Additionally, when you get to the big circle in the middle, when you get inside this area right here, you automatically feel like you're part of it. You know that space was made for you. It was made for you to share. It was made for you to be a part of something else. And we just stole those designs from, civilizations. You go to Italy, you go to Spain, you go to the Zoccolos and the piazzas, and there's a church in the middle and the space around. It's the same kind of thing. And so you kind of on a primal level know that you're there and it's for you. So that it jumpstarts immediacy, it jumpstarts your ability to get in and take part and see why you're there. Why are you there? It makes you start to think.
Okay, so moving on, these are the designers of Burning Man and some of the evolution of the shape of the layout of Black Rock City from 1992. They first started to bring in this sort of circular type shape, I guess 96, like a reverse keyhole for Helco. And then the current layout has basically not changed since 1999. The guy that came up with this layout, Rod Garrett, he was part of the Beat generation, friends with Lenny Bruce and Gary Snyder. And he's basically a self-taught landscape architect and designer. So quite how he came to get this job to be the designer of Burning Man is a little bit of a mystery. That this guy is quite enigmatic. He's passed away. And then he's been replaced by the longer-haired guy on the right, Andrew Johnston. His title is Design Steward of the Man, which he's had since 2005. He's the founder of an art-based charity that's called Big Picture, which is funded by the Tides Foundation, George Soros's group. And they're basically mixing art together with at-risk youth, graffiti. In the past, he's worked in European palaces. He's been also the project lead of Burning Man Earth, which we're going to talk about a little bit in a minute. And then this guy's clients include NASA, Stanford Medical, the Smithsonian, the Chabot Space Center, and he even used a piece of the moon to make a ring for someone out of moon rock. So this is quite an interesting character, quite an exceptional fellow, I guess. And he's named as a Newsonia 500 ambassador, which I had to look up what that is. I looked it up and look at all the names who come up who are Newsonia 500 ambassadors, including Howard Rheingold, Daniel Pinchbeck, Iona Miller, Alex Gray, Barbara Marks Hubbard, who was part of Task Force Delta with Jim Chanelin and Michael Aquino, Mark Pauline, who's the founder of Survival Research Labs, Paul Hawken, who is a major environmentalist. Jörg Bullock is one of the founders of Burning Man. So is John Law. I mean, this is quite interesting company that he's keeping. Now, this guy apprenticed under someone called William Holgate, who was possibly the finest grainer and marbler in the UK since Thomas Kershaw. I think that's someone from the 1800s. And this guy, Bill Holgate, he did a Pink Floyd album cover. I haven't been able to work out which one, but he did the walnut graining on that. And he did the wood staining at the House of Lords. So he's kind of one of the top people in his field in the UK. And in fact, he's a free man of the Worshipful Company of Painter Stainers. And he has the freedom of the City of London. I mean, to get the freedom of the City of London is a big deal. And this is the absolute core of Freemasonry, Knights Templar, secret societies right within the city. This guy's apprentice is who the designer of Burning Man is. I bring that as, I'd maybe count that as two coincidences, because the other one, Rod Garrett being part of the Beats, the legacy of the Merry Pranksters there is another one.
Well, and Daniel Pinchbeck, his mom was Joyce Glassman, who helped to launch feminism, and then, of course, he's been behind a lot of the psychedelic movement. He was the poster boy for the 2012 End of the World scenario. Iona Miller is, ironically, the ex-wife of Richard Allen Miller. Richard Allen Miller was Office of Navy Intelligence, Army Intelligence, and as I have posted personally my own recording of Richard Allen Miller discussing that Iona is a CIA spin writer.
What Iona does what she actually does for CIA is that she's she writes their spin.
Well, no shit.
Well, I understand that.
And then we've got other people that we've exposed related to the whole triangle there in New York with Burning Man with Alex Gray and their whole temple there right next to the Hudson, on and on and on. So,
yeah, so it's yet again we find the same sort of cluster of of people. I bring up this next slide now. This is from the Secrets in Plain Sight website, where he looks at the sacred geometry of things.
That's Scott Onstott's website.
Yeah. Now I want to point out that this has actually been taken off of his website. So make of that what you will. The actual specific location of Burning Man does move slightly from year to year. So any alignment between the center of Burning Man to something else may not be exact because of the movement. But if you're looking at across the world, the distance that the Burning Man city moves is probably insignificant. But anyway, what he found was that it's Burning Man is not aligned to the north. It's aligned to a 45-degree angle, which seems to be suited to the sunrise. But it turns out that links it up with a place called Santiago de Compostela in Spain. And this is an extremely important religious site. It's the end of a pilgrimage called the Way of St. James. And I have the emblem of St. James in the top right of the slide there, which is the scallop shell logo used by Royal Dutch Shell Petroleum Company. So, and then the U.S. ambassador to Great Britain is called the ambassador to the Court of St. James. So St. James is very, very significant in the world. The Court of St. James is the British Parliament. The Way of St. James is this most important Catholic pilgrimage. They wear this scallop thing, and then Royal Dutch Shell, one of the biggest corporations in the world, deeply tied into the oligarchy, they've adopted this thing as their symbol, and it's a pilgrimage of the land of the dead, where the souls go to the most western point of the European continent to drop off on their journey into the afterworld. It's the gateway of the dead and the sun. And Burning Man, a festival celebrating death and rebirth, is perfectly aligned not only to the sun but also to this place. And then one of the churches in the Santiago de Compostela in this town is the 17th century convent and church of Saint Francisco. And then Assisi, Italy, is a sister city. So St. Francis of Assisi, San Francisco, is supposedly named after. So that, I mean, if these alignments line up, that's a hell of a connection. Just to point to any church would be a strange connection, but one that's associated with this pilgrimage and with this gateway of the dead and the sun is very interesting. The other connection from Secrets in Plain Sights was saying that the 2012 center of Black Rock City has the same latitude as the center of the Solomon Guggenheim Museum on the edge of Central Park. And I've got a picture of that Guggenheim inset there. And then other elements of Burning Man's temple apparently line up to these occult figures in Central Park as well. And I believe Solomon Guggenheim was married to a Rothschild. Yeah, anyway, if people want to come to this slide and look at all the references to what I'm talking about are in the notes to the slides, which you can download with the presentation. I don't know what really to put in these occult alignments. I think, the fact that it looks like a Bennu bird and that it's in a pentagon is, to me, very significant. These other ones may be significant, maybe not, but just in the sake of thoroughness, I point them out. So here's some images of Burning Man in the very early days. And they used to basically, the man was flat, probably brought in a couple of trucks assembled on the ground, and then everyone would get together and pull on these ropes to raise the man up. And so it was a real team effort involved in the pulling of the ropes, that we were teaming together at this event to make the thing that would be the centerpiece that we're all going to then burn together later. And you can see a guy sit up there with his drum kit. I think it's the same guy that was drumming away at earlier versions of Burning Man on the beach. And then here they're all lined up and they have this ritual where they would draw a line in the sand, and they would say, like, okay, on the other side of this line in the sand, everything's going to be different. You have to stop across this line in the sand. And that line is actually still maintained within the layout of Burning Man today. It's just a little bit harder to see. And I think I have a clip of that.
We arrived out at this vast plain. I took a stick and I drew a line on the ground. And I said, on the other side of this line, everything will be different. And everything has been different.
A place is an idea that's so powerful and so alluring that people will go to the worst place in the world just to get a little taste of it.
All right, this slide, 2014. So now the man's a non-profit, and this is what it looks like. And basically, they've kind of built this clown suit for the man with all these funny buttons on it. And a lot of the burners don't really like this suit, but if you look closely at the statue, you can see underneath it there's a spine, there's the legs. The core skeleton of the Burning Man remains under this clothing, and it is that Pan-like figure that we saw earlier with the wide flared hips. The horns are still there, and in fact, if you look at the head of the man, there are two faces. There's one shape of the face on the front of it, and there's a different shaped face on the side. The side face looks more devilish to me. And inside the man, when you get right to the core of it, I don't know if people know that this is there because very few people ever get to see it, but the Burning Man actually has a heart. And this occult symbol, if you watch the video about the Swiss Templars of Octagon, you learn the significance of the octagon shape in the occult hierarchy and power structure. But there's an octagon shape around this man heart. There's a bunch of flower of lifestyle, occult symbolism there. Everyone's written their names, and that burns at the core of Burning Man. Then you can see at the bottom there's one of the art cars there. The Red Rooster Ranch is just pulled up alongside it. At the base of the man is they have a little plazas and market stalls where agents of these volunteer Burning Man groups are there trying to recruit you, indoctrinate you, interact with you, whatever they do. Now, this is a photo of Burning Man 2015 on burn night. The man's all lit up, and then there's a big circle around it, which is the fire perimeter. Within that, there's a bunch of people doing fire dancing and performances. So there's about a 30-minute fire spinning, twirling, dancing ritual with a lot of live drumming. And then they set fire to the man. Fireworks come out of him. His arms go up, and then he collapses in a controlled manner. This is all very, very sophisticated pyrotechnics show. And it lasts for a couple of hours. This photo really gives you a sense of what Burning Man looks like at night. If you're on the playa at night and you look out, this is what you see: the sea of color and neon and fire and all these different art cars around it. And it really is quite a sight to behold. But going back to the earlier aerial photos I showed of the city of Burning Man and the esplanade, the inner playa, that's not visible in the shot at all. This ring of the circle here is that's just in the middle of it. So from the base of the man to the edge of the city is a mile in either direction. A couple of things to point out that are, again, coincidences. The shape the man is making, to me, looks very much like this ancient rune, which is known as the rune of Alhaz, or some call it the trident. And the rune of Alhaz is obviously in this anti-nuclear symbol that was adopted by the peace movement, backed by Bertrand Russell and I believe the Huxleys. And so that's now internationally seen as a no nuclear sign or a peace sign if we see that symbol. But in fact, it's the logo of the German 3rd Panzer Division. It's a Nazi logo. So I just mentioned that in passing. I don't know if anyone else can see a resemblance between the shape of the Burning Man and the rune of Alhaz, but I've talked earlier as well about how he's doing Aleister Crowley's poses, particularly the pose of Apophis, which is the power pose.
Now, I also wanted to throw in, I've done some research on that, and it appears that it could also be related to an upside-down broken cross with the two arms snapped downward.
Yep, and that would make a lot of sense as well.
Right.
All right, so the structure of BRC, Black Rock City, as they call it, it's got a lot of military kind of terminology. They use rangers, they have special forces, they have an echelon group, and there's a mysterious ruling body called the Council of Darkness. And, I've spoken to people that have been going to Burning Man for longer than me who've never heard of this Council of Darkness. Like I'd say probably 96, 97% of burners have never heard of it. And because they've never heard of it, they'll tell you it doesn't exist. But the burners I know that are the most involved with the actual core building of the city, they're like, oh, yeah, the Council of Darkness. I mean, it's quite well known. But no one really knows, or in the public anyway, who's on it, who's in charge of it, how they get selected, what they do. But they are the on-the-ground decision makers, actually doing the operational side of this business. They have a DPW, Department of Public Works, that's mostly volunteer, although a lot of these guys are getting paid now, which is good. They have a group that's called Gate, Perimeter, and Exodus, and I've put their logo there to the right of the screen. You'll see the skull and bones, the lock and the key and the number 13. I mean, it doesn't get much more occult than that. I'm sorry, there's no way to interpret that other than occult. They have 951 paid workers. Not all of them are getting a full-time salary. There's about 100 full-time employees and more than 7,500 volunteers building the city. It takes in $37 million of revenues. They pay $15.6 million for their salaries and contractors. This is for a week. And they spend about $1 million on art. So they're paying themselves a lot more than they're paying the artists. From 1990 in building Black Rock City, they engaged with the Society of Carpenters, which is a little-known group that's actually very active in things like the Army Corps of Engineers. There's more than 2,000 military members of the Society of Carpenters. When they moved out to the desert, this guy, Danger Ranger, he had a little black book. He gave it to other founder Harley Dubois and said, call these names. These people will come and help you. And she said everyone that she called agreed to without hesitation or explanation. I mean, that's one hell of a little black book. Oh, hi, yeah, this guy gave me your number. Yeah, will you come to the desert and volunteer to build a city for us? Yep, no problem. Every single person. How does that come about? I mean, that's very probably a list of operatives or agents to me. I don't really see what else it could be. Stuart Mangrum, who's a former Air Force intelligence analyst, he creates the themes every year with Larry Harvey. Their first one was Halco. Last year was Da Vinci. Next year will be Radical Ritual. The Minister of Propaganda, he resigned this year. Possibly too much criticism coming from burners.me. He's gone on to run propaganda for the Maker movement. But to my knowledge, they haven't actually replaced that position. But it's basically since 1993, there's been a Minister of Propaganda. There are now a bunch of FM radio stations. 30 in 2015. BMIR is the official radio station. They have a mailing list called the Jack Rabbit Speaks. They have a blog that was called The Voices of Burning Man, and now it's the Burning Man Journal. They have newspapers, BRC Weekly, Piss Clear, Black Rock Beacon. The Centre Camp, and then next to it, the Media Mecca. They have free Wi-Fi if anyone needs to get online. There's a bunch of curated talks. They have TEDx's. Palenque Norte is the psychedelic salons. Many of the workshops are themed around sex or alternative religions. And the thing about the theme camps is it's a way of the audience to self-select into subcultures. And so you submit an application to Burning Man's placement team and they decide where your theme camp will be located if it gets approved. And so you have to tell them who's in the camp, what's the camp about, what are your values, what's your art project, what are you contributing to Burning Man? And then they work out, they can put you around people with similar values. And it's definitely like the work that you and Hans have done on the secret history of FM radio. I really see an overlap of how the FM radio shows were used to create these segmented audiences. Well, the Burning Man theme camps are very much doing it as well. And to buy your tickets to Burning Man is quite a convoluted process. You have to log onto their website and you create a burner profile where you answer a whole bunch of questions, and then you provide like 1,000-word essay if you're inclined, or even longer if you want, about who you are and what your values are and what you're passionate about and everything you're going to bring to Burning Man. And so because of this burner profile, you're being tracked in databases all the way through, who you camp with and that type of thing. And they have a thing
talk about the ultimate Big Brother system there, and everybody thinks it's freedom. Potentially.
They have this ticket sales called the directed group sale, which is what I call the world's biggest guest list. And so they're selecting sort of 10 to maybe 20,000 people that are handpicked by the Burning Man organization as that's the type of person we want to come. And if you're on that list, you kind of guarantee that you get a ticket at the regular price. If you're not on that ticket list, you enter a lottery to get the ticket effectively, or you pay a much higher price to get Burning Man tickets. But this is a way for them to curate their audience and curate who's the insiders, and it makes it valuable for people that want to go to Burning Man to suck up to the Burning Man organizers, because they might get to be on this great guest list and have a chance to get tickets. And then they have these docents that go out to the camps, trying to indoctrinate the values of Burning Man to many of the camps and make sure that they're sort of conforming. I've shared a little example here from the Burning Man radio guide from a couple of years ago of just one of the radio stations, which is 91.5 Frequency Publica, radio by the people for the people. And what their programming is attempt to perform mind control by beaming your thoughts into the heads of the Burning Man masses using the latest advancements in RF technology. But beware of self-immolation. All interested poets, DJs, spoken word artists, whatever, are invited to come by or contact us to sign up for airtime and a chance to unveil your own personal psychosis. So, they're performing mind control, beaming thoughts into your heads. It says it right there. It says on the ticket, you risk your life or injury by attending, and it says you're participating. So you're participating in a mind control experiment. Now, someone might read that and say, well, that's just someone being ironic, But it just goes on again and again and again and again on Burning Man, where you find this irony is always about Satanism, transhumanism, mind control, MK Ultra.
And Satanists always put this kind of stuff right in your face, too.
Absolutely they do. And so I note that not only is the Gate Perimeter Exodus a Skull and Bones, but the Black Rock Rangers is a Skull and Bones as well. And so the Skull and Bones symbol It's very important to them. That relates not only to the Skull and Bones Secret Society, but also this pirate utopia. Again, it's the symbol of pirates, and Hakim Bey wants to make pirate utopias and temporary autonomous zones, so they adopt that as the symbol. Moving on to the theme camps, I want to look at just a few examples. Now, this guy here, this Simon of the Plyer, he's kind of an unofficial moderator of the official Burning Man forum. So this page is from Burning Man's website, where he started a thread called Mankind Research Unlimited. Now, that was a real company, and they're basically an East Coast version based around Rochester, New York, where this guy's located. Of SRI and of Project Stargate and the type of mind control psychic experiments that were going on that we've talked about in earlier parts of the series, and so he's posted this thing here in 2008, this thread about his theme camp. Welcome to Camp Mankind Research Unlimited. The theme's evolution. We feel we're right on the cutting edge of new technologies. We're looking for participants to engage and enjoy the following fun activities provided by our staff. Super learning, man-machine cybernetic interactions, special sensory biophysical activities, brain and mind control, effects of altered states of consciousness on the human psyche, environmental effects upon biological systems, infrasonic and ultrasonic effects upon biological systems. I mean, again, like, okay, maybe this is just an ironic, funny joke, but the actual people that do these experiments are going to Burning Man. So why wouldn't we think that this is really actually
going on, right?
Yeah, they're testing the waters. Like, if you come around this theme camp, it's like, hey, I heard you guys are into mind control and sensory deprivation. You can start up a conversation about it with someone that's probably into it, and quite possibly after Burning Man, maybe you just accidentally run into someone you've been at Burning Man or whatever that invites you to one of these things, and you get dosed into it. But you can go to burningman.com and follow this thread, because he's kept this thread alive for 8 years. This guy's posted more than 20,000 posts on the Burning Man website, and many of them about hundreds of pages on this Mankind Research Unlimited thread, where he talks all about mind control, the latest mind control techniques. And this person seems to be associated with, I mentioned before, the troll groups of Burning Man that seem to use the intelligence playbook. This guy seems to be in that group, as do some of his associates. So is it irony or is it real? Is it revelation of the method? I've shown on this picture as well some of the other theme camps. There's a Thunderdome, like the Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. That movie came out in 1985. Burning Man started in 86. They have a Barbie death camp where Barbies are being crucified, being tortured, all manner of hurt being put upon Barbies and Wine Bistro. And I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the Church of Satan that one of their visions was to segment the population into pleasure domes, and that within these pleasure domes people could indulge whatever their particular desires were. And that seems to me exactly what the theme camps of Burning Man are doing. They're segmenting the population into their own unique thing based on, if you could do anything thou wilt, what would that be? Well, the variety, the smorgasbord of things is there at Burning Man for you to pick from and go choose. And, thanks to the burner profile and where you camp, somebody can track whatever your choices are. So moving on now, I want to drill into a couple of theme camps that have been like quite big news of Burning Man over the last year or so. So this is a shot of what they call the 10 o'clock side of Burning Man, which is where the largest sound camps are. So if you look at the photo at the top left, it's quite a high aerial shot, and then the larger photo to the right is zooming in a bit more. So the square area with a bunch of white tents in it, that is the very, very left corner there. That's called White Ocean. So you can see in front of White Ocean they have this stage set up with these massive metal girders with holes drilled inside them, and then they have this compound where there's a wall of RVs, keeping the public out, and then they have their own kind of living quarters on the inside. And if you contrast that with some of the camps around them, where they sort of have RVs there lined up or whatever, but they make sure they have these open, inviting areas where you can come into the camp and say hello. And that's, when I first started going to Burning Man in 1998, it was all about meeting the people next to you. Now it's about, being exclusive, and I'm a VIP, you can't come and meet me because, you don't have access to the VIP area and things like that. And then this other camp, the Lost Hotel, and Caravansicle is kind of two camps together where they were experimenting with this new kind of dwelling, a stackable 10 foot by 10 foot canvas cube. So in the Lost Hotel, there's a 2-story deck of these in like a U shape, and next door on the Caravansicle, these things are individually on the ground level. And then I've got one more photo, which is the middle one on the left, and that's an aerial shot of an art car. So this is all people dancing to the music coming from one of the art cars, with other of the art cars lined up around it in a circle. And I believe that in the middle of this is an art car called Robot Heart, that we're going to talk about that in a moment as well. But drilling into these two camps, the White Ocean here and the Caravansicle. So what White Ocean, known as a sound camp, the guy behind it, their family has a listing at RussiaMafia.com. His dad's worth $4.9 billion. He bought an entire mountain in Austria and then fenced it off so that the locals could never get in it. He really sounds like a little bit like your typical James Bond villain type of guy. And actually, his company, Ocean Group International, funded James Bond, the Quantum of Solace movie. They have a technology holding company called Black Ocean. They operate a fleet of private jets and do these quite interesting, large-scale capital refinancing deals out of Switzerland. It's probably a bit obscure to get into. They got Paul Oakenfold to be the musical director for their camp, and he was basically one of the founders of the dance music scene. He was the first $1 million DJ, but before that he was an A&R guy for a record company. He actually was the person that discovered and signed Salt and Pepper, Push It Real Good, and also Jazzy Jeff that teamed up with Will Smith and the Fresh Prince. And then Oakenfold's the guy who brought techno from Ibiza to Goa. So you can see some of the flyers that this camp has done, where they have their white ocean logo with these distinctive metal shapes, and in their imagery, the distinctive metal shapes of the arms of their camp are being used in commercial flyers for events this is like London Fashion Week. So this is kind of a no-no at Burning Man to use your corporate, use your camp at Burning Man to promote your corporation, their Black Ocean and everything. And so as a result of this camp was attacked in 2016 in what they called a sabotage attack, and it got picked up, the story, all around the world. And it was kind of presented as a bit of a class war at Burning Man, that because these people are wealthy, the guy owns 50 private jets or something, that this was poor burners fighting back against these expensive camps. As it turned out, it seems like it was a much more prosaic thing of they contracted people to come and build the camp for them, and those people were owed large sums of money that hadn't been paid, and so in retaliation they came and they did stuff like they put grease on the floor of an RV, they cut some electrical wires, they dumped some RV tanks onto the sand, really kind of some minor stuff, but it's a sign that it's not all hugs and rainbows at Burning Man. There's camps fighting other camps, there's financial disputes, and there's people there from not necessarily your mom and apple pie and white picket fence background. The other camp I want to talk to is this one called Caravansicle, which is also known as Popsicle Camp. And this was founded by a member of the Burning Man board of directors, a guy called Jim Tannenbaum. And when the scandal came out about this camp, he actually had to resign. The camp had a budget above $2 million, and the canvas cubes that I showed before, it was $10,000 per person to stay in these cubes. And the great feature was that it had a flushing porcelain toilet. So these people are actually putting plumbing into the middle of the desert. Now, of course, at Burning Man, things go wrong. Like I said, it's a harsh environment of technology. When you pay $20,000 to stay in a canvas camp and your toilet doesn't even flush, you're going to be pretty pissed. People get pissed. And at Burning Man, they will go to their concierge or the camp manager and say, hey, you guys need to fix this. But in the past, it was just people going to the desert being self-reliant. If your toilet broke, well, you're in the porta potties for the rest of the week. Just deal with it. Shit happens, literally. And this camp was, they had a costume guide for people when they arrived. They gave them a little basket of ice creams to hand out and stuff like that. And it's like everything was done for them, and it seems to really be going away from the spirit of Burning Man. One of their themes is decommodification, that we're creating a unique experience. We're not selling a prepackaged tourist experience. And this is the very definition of selling a prepackaged tourist experience, in my opinion, and the opinion of many other burners. So the guy resigned, but unfortunately it hasn't stopped this type of camp. In fact, Burning Man has doubled down on embracing and promoting these paid camps. Okay. We'll just do a little bit of these art cars, and then we might take a break again. So moving on to the art cars of Burning Man, the Department of Mutant Vehicles, as well as the Department of Public Works, the DMV permits these art cars. You get a daytime or a nighttime permit. And, some of them are small, only a couple of people fit on, like a modified golf buggy or something. Some of them can fit hundreds of people. I want to take a look at one of these art cars in particular, which is called Robot Heart, and particularly one of the founders of Robot Heart, a guy called Tom Kaitis. But you see a picture of this art car at the top right. It's basically a bus that's been converted into a wall of speakers. So the inside of the bus is all air-conditioned racks of amplifiers, and then there's massive speaker decks all along the side. That's subwoofers on the bottom, and then the main drivers up high in the air. There's a DJ booth in the middle. People climb up there with the DJ, dance around with him, climb and hang off different things of this bus. And then thousands, maybe as many as 10,000 people come and dance around this art car. So this has become the most popular art car at Burning Man, both measured by Facebook likes of their group and also by the size of the crowds that they draw. And one thing that sort of stands out to me is when you look at the work that Hans Utter did, looking at the Grateful Dead wall of sound setup and this rack of speakers, it sort of reminds me of that. I mean, is it really there for sound fidelity, or is it more like a weaponized broadcast platform to send the stuff out? But I mean, it sounds fantastic, and I've got no beef with these guys. They've always been very nice to me. They've got a great art car, but I heard a rumor that I just couldn't believe that I had to check out, and it turns out it checks out. And what I heard was that the owner of Robot Heart was the owner of Blackwater, the mercenary arc. And it turns out that, yep, that's true. So this guy, Tom Kaitis, a core member of the Robot Heart crew, I have an image there, which is his profile from couchsurfing.com. So this is obviously information that he's happy to publicly have on the internet. He's put it on his public profile, and he's the founder of Voxer and Triple Canopy, and a core member of Robot Heart Burning Man Camp. Now, the Triple Canopy mercenary company was restructured as Constellus Holdings, and the owners of Triple Canopy and Blackwater joined forces. So basically, Eric Prince, the founder of Blackwater, he's in Dubai. I'm not sure if he's actually able to travel back to the US right now, but they sort of restructured this organization, and they merged together Blackwater, which was then called XE, Academy Training Centre, Triple Canopy, Constellus, Strategic Social, Tidewater Global Services, National Strategic Protective Services, International Development Solutions, Edinburgh International, and the Olive Group, all merged together now to be this Constellus Holdings. And the board of directors is Red McCombs, former US Attorney General John Ashcroft, White House Chief Counsel Jack Quinn, Admiral Bobby Inman, Russ Robinson, Jason DeYonka, Dean Basaki, and Triple Canopy co-founder Tom Kaitis. Now, he's also the founder of the Further Future Festival out in Nevada that's had guests such as Astro Teller and the Google CEO Eric Schmidt. I've got a photo there of Eric Schmidt at Further Future wearing his anti-laser mirror ball vest and his Burning Man style getup. he was famously hired at Google because he went to Burning Man. And so this crew, he re-enlisted in the army after 9/11 and earned a Bronze Star for his services there. He's a Green Beret. His brother, Peter Cadis, is a singer-songwriter. The band's Interpol and The National, which reminds me of the work with Miles Copeland and that, the IRS records and FBI records and that.
Right. That was Dave McGowan that told me that.
Yeah. So anyway, there's a hell of a coincidence, and behind the scenes of Burning Man, we find the biggest art cars owned by the biggest mercenary company in the world, Blackwater at the Black Rock. Move on to this picture, and so this is an aerial shot of a few different aerial shots of Burning Man. At the bottom left, and we're on slide 39 here. The bottom left, I want to show you the airport. So Burning Man's airport is mostly propeller planes. There's a few increasing number of helicopters now going to it, including commercial helicopter services. But hundreds of planes and people there camping next to their planes. The bottom right image is the temple, and you can see there's a few people going to check out the temple, hanging out, investigate what's up. The top left image is one of the camps called District, and that's a very popular day party. So this is a crowd of people on a dance floor in the middle of the hot desert sun on a dance floor in front of the DJs. And you get an indication from these two images what draws the most crowds at Burning Man. And as much as Burning Man would like to think that everyone is there for a transformational experience and a radical ritual and all that kind of stuff, the reality is if you go where the people are, they're there for the music. They're there for the DJs. You're seeing some of the best DJs in the world for free. And, wherever you go, there's something else going on. So if you're into that sort of music, it's an amazing, amazing place for it. Over on the right, I've got two images there. One, the statue is actually, I think it's called Truth is Beauty. It's not the Burning Man. It's another gigantic artwork. It's 65 feet high. And then, so this middle image here, you can really see that line in the sand. That connects all the way through the middle of Burning Man and harkens back to that earlier time of the first Burning Man where they drew the line and they stepped across it and nothing would ever be the same. So since we're limited to time, I guess we have to wrap this up and come back. And I don't know if we're going to do part 5B or C, but this is probably a good slide to end on because we got to this at the end of the last one and we didn't really have time to go through it. And so this is looking at the role that electronic music and raves have had at Burning Man. So the very first Burning Man on the beach, this is a bunch of pagan people drumming. I'll have a quick clip of that. So let's just do that clip.
Why don't you explain the history? Apparently, it's a historical thing done through the ages. Not a good question? Okay. Go ahead.
It's an immemorial tradition, sure. It's a tribute to the sun.
I just wanted to tell Larry that in Celtic tradition, the Merlin is the most powerful of the wizards, is the most powerful and knowledgeable of the mystical and the magical. And the Merlin is powerful partly because he's wounded and he's lame, and he understands compassion. He understands and connects with those of us who are flawed. And because of that woundedness, he can grow to even greater dimension. And in a sense, the man today was wounded and is more a part of us than he would if he was fully erect all the time. So take heart. It was a beautiful ritual.
We are stronger than before. We won't wait any longer. We are stronger.
And an interesting thing about that clip was that the song that they're singing is actually it's a popular pagan Wiccan theme song created in the 1980s out of Mendocino. The first batch of DJs that show up at Burning Man was 1992 with Goa Gill. And he's a very interesting character, Goa Gill, definitely one of the founders of the electronic music scene. I don't know if you've got anything in particular you want to say about him, Jan?
Oh, well, I've met the guy. I've been to a couple of his raves back in the day. I haven't been to any since probably 2007 or so, but yeah, he was tied in, and I've got some photos connecting him directly to Albert Hoffman, who was of course the claimed inventor of LSD. I actually think it was his boss. And Goa Gill, of course, had plates of free LSD at the rave sitting right in front of the DJ stand, but not a whole lot.
Yeah, so well, I mean, back in the day, like the early '90s, this psytrance scene, it was, it was very very much tied to LSD. This was called acid house, and so he came out. I've actually got the flyer here, 1992, for the first Burning Man event with Goa Gill. They had lasers there. They had visuals. I mean, this is the sort of thing that draws a crowd. And really, before the DJ showed up, Burning Man was, about 100 people max, come out of the Cacophony Society, members of the Cacophony Society and the other various involved occult groups that could be prepared to go all the way out to the desert. But once this stuff started coming in, like the music, and these DJs, they didn't just bring some records, they brought an entire crew with them. They brought a scene. The DJs were promoters of the scene as well back in these days. And so Burning Man sort of became another underground rave for this community. And I have, on burners.me, I've got the full story of the history of electronic music at Burning Man. It's linked to from this slide. I recommend people read through that. But basically, there was resistance from people within the burner community in the beginning. They didn't want this dance music coming, so they created this techno ghetto, and they put it over in the distance. At one point, electronic music was banned entirely, and this guy Mark Heller, who was a Marine, he called himself a raver Marine. He went and wired up a bunch of the art installations with music behind paper mache so that it would be harder for them to find out where the speakers were and where the music was coming from. And they just did these raves anyway. At one point, the Burning Man organizers flew over the ravers and dropped human feces out of a plane on top of people dancing. That's how much they wanted to get rid of this element from Burning Man. And in 1996, there was this amazing war against Goa Gill as the DJ representing the ravers. And this was after the Helco burning event and all the shenanigans that went around this. A Stanford anthropologist called Jim Mason, he first heard about Burning Man in 1995 as a rave. And he heard about it as a rave, and that inspired him to go to Burning Man to fight against raves and to try to get ravers out of Burning Man. Now, why would you even care? You've never been there before. It's, a 6-hour drive at minimum to get out there. Who cares if a couple of hundred kids are having a rave in a different state? But this Stanford anthropologist really, really cared. He cared enough to get a military-grade flamethrower and to build an art car around it, and then to take the flamethrower out there to have like a sort of Mexican standoff in the desert against Goa Gill. And I have a brief clip of that of this machine, which is called the Vegematic. Now, I can't prove it, but one of the people riding on that Vegematic machine, I think, is a guy called Xander Rose. And both Jim Mason and Xander Rose work for Stuart Brand, and they're part of the various Long Now Foundation groups that are all, funnily enough, in Fort Mason in San Francisco is kind of where their headquarters are. Xander Rose grew up in the Sausalito houseboats, which is where Stuart Brand lives, and where we've sort of traced the very, very first origins of these occult ritual burnings in San Francisco. And in his resume and bio, he says that he was sort of recruited at a very young age with Stuart Brand and built all these kind of crazy art projects for him, including those incorporating military grade flamethrowers. Now, that's circumstantial evidence at best, because at Burning Man there's a lot of flamethrowers, but I think it's that guy is in the video and the clip. It sort of looks a bit like him. And how many flamethrower related projects are the Stuart Brand burning group doing based around art and the Merry Pranksters and all this kind of stuff? But anyway, this guy Jim Mason, he's still working for Stuart Brand today. He's doing a project called the Rosetta something, where they're looking at preserving indigenous languages. Very, very worthy cause. But you've got Stanford Anthropology Department wanting to have a war at Burning Man to keep the ravers out. Is that because there was an anthropological interest in the Burning Man project from Stanford? If not, I don't know. Why else? It seems this guy's going to an enormous amount of trouble to keep ravers away from a party he'd never been to.
Weaponized anthropology.
Yeah. In 1998, Burning Man was described as the ultimate meta rave by Michael Gosney. He's the guy that organised the digital B-ins as part of the Macworld conferences. So Apple launched Macworld. It also launched digital B-ins, where guys like Timothy Leary and John Perry Barlow would come and give speeches talking about how the PC is just like being a hippie in the counterculture. Everyone should have LSD and buy computers. He's called Burning Man the Ultimate Meta Rave. And in fact, he and his group, Anon Salon, were very involved in creating Burning Man, some of the biggest stages, and bringing out their crews. These people are throwing festivals and parties that thousands of people attend, even though they're underground and illegal. And some of them then became legal, large official parties and events. Like many people are coming to them, and they say, hey, we're going to go at Burning Man. We'll be throwing a party out there, and here are the DJs. Of course, those thousands of people go with them. Larry Harvey says, oh, well, we're going to wear a funny hat and do LSD. I don't know where the crowd comes from. In 2003, something was passed called the Rave Act. And basically this was designed to shut down all these underground parties. It gave the police the ability to go to a venue and steal any equipment, confiscate any equipment related to the production of music. And so that included the DJ's computer. And, for a DJ playing music off a computer to lose that computer, that's devastating. And also DJ's records, sound systems, stuff like that. I have it on pretty good authority from a source that the rave scene in the United States was modeled on the Grateful Dead scene and the Dead shows and everything like that. And there's a very interesting kind of coincidence and overlap in the timeline when you look at what Bear Owsley did in creating the festival scene and the Grateful Dead scene. And, he created these very unique sound systems that almost seemed like military technology, which he then financed and brought to all of these festivals. Well, in the UK at about the same time as that, the guys behind Turbo Sound, which is now the Function One speaker systems that are very popular at Burning Man, they were operating on an office out of a military base, and they created these experimental sound systems for the Glastonbury Festival, which has an occult pyramid stage and is on the occult Glastonbury tour. So you sort of see the same thing coming in the late 60s, early 70s. Let's create music festivals and let's build wall of sound systems to draw the kids in and overwhelm them while we're dosing them with suggestogens. And then we have these overlaps between the Turbo Sound and Function One systems being at Burning Man and the Grateful Dead scene intersecting. And if you look at what happened with Acid House and the evolution of the rave scene, there's kind of a different pathway that the UK went down than England went, so then the US went down, and it's sort of all originated about the same time in the mid '80s, like in 1986. Here it was this underground thing. It didn't really catch fire in America. It was kind of pushed to the fringes of society, like Burning Man, and many of the underground parties were on Air Force bases and hangars, or in facilities like military armories, like former military facilities, is where they held these underground raves. Then after the Rave Act, that was then replaced by this commercial electronic dance music played in nightclubs and large stadiums, and that's what the music scene is today, and there's a lot of big money attached to it, and there's certainly an argument can be made that the Rave Act led to the widespread adoption of commercial EDM, and possibly the big record companies were behind it. But what happened in the UK is it seems like this acid house scene was directed more towards ecstasy than towards LSD. And they used the ecstasy to take the social problem they had of football hooligans and to basically use this peace drug to take the violence out of the football hooligan scene. And so many of these football thugs in Britain became bouncers at these rave parties and did the security. And then as bouncers, they were dealing the ecstasy to the patrons and making plenty of money on the side. And suddenly they were doing really well. They didn't need to be a football thug anymore. And when they went to the matches, instead of getting drunk, they'd pop a couple of ecstasies and they would hug and cheer and sing the songs instead of fighting it out. And there's still problems in Europe with football hooliganism, but in the UK it's decreased massively from what it was. And from people I've talked to that, were there going to Ministry of Sound when they were 16 and things like that, they'd say that this is absolutely what happened, that thanks to ecstasy, the football hooligans stopped. So that's an example of the social engineering and the changing images of man, but over there they wanted to apply it to a different target group and to achieve a different outcome. So I guess we didn't get to cover a lot of the really juicy stuff, Jan. We'll come back and we'll do that in another part. But at least we sort of have established Burning Man coming out to the desert and some of the people involved.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate it. And so here's a good breaking point, and we'll come back and do, I guess, what will be part 6 or 5B here in the coming weeks.
Great. Thanks, Jan. See you, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.